The wind off the Montana plains didn't just bite. It carved. It took pieces of you, small at first, the warmth from your fingers, the moisture from your lips, and if you let it, it'd hollow you out until there wasn't anything left but bone and regret. Silas Granger knew that wind. He'd been born into it, raised by it, damn near killed by it half a dozen times. But knowing something and surviving it were different animals, and lately he'd been losing track of which one he was wrestling. He stood in the doorway of the barn, watching the sky turn the color of old bruises. December 23rd. 3 days until Christmas. 3 days until the bank took everything. The foreclosure notice was still nailed to the front door of the house, flapping in the wind like a white flag of surrender. He'd read it so many times the words had burned into his brain. Final notice. Outstanding debt, $3,847. Failure to remit payment by December 26th will result in immediate seizure of property and assets. $3,847. Might as well have been $3 million. Behind him, the cattle lowed in their pen, skinny things with ribs you could count from across the yard. 23 head left out of what used to be 200. The drought had taken the rest, slow and cruel, turning the grassland into cracked earth and dust. The ones that didn't starve, he'd sold for pennies on the dollar just to keep the bank from coming sooner. It hadn't been enough. Nothing was ever enough. Should have let it go last year, he muttered to the empty barn. His voice sounded strange in the silence, like a ghost talking to itself. Should have walked away when Ma died, but he hadn't. Couldn't. The ranch was all he had left of his father, of the life they'd scraped together out of this brutal country. Giving it up felt like betraying every hour his old man had spent in the saddle, every fence post he'd driven into frozen ground, every winter he'd survived when weaker men packed up and ran. Pride, his mother had called it before the fever took her. Stupidity, she'd said with her last bit of strength, was just pride that hadn't learned its lesson yet. Silas figured he was about to learn. He walked back toward the house, boots crunching through ice-crusted snow. The place looked worse in the fading light, paint peeling, shutters hanging crooked, the porch sagging on one side like a drunk leaning against a bar. He'd meant to fix it all, meant to do a lot of things. The letter was in his pocket, folded and refolded so many times the creases had started to tear. He'd written it 6 weeks ago, late one night after too much whiskey and too much silence. Sent it east to one of those agencies that matched men with women willing to head west. The kind of arrangement his neighbors whispered about, half scandalized, half envious. Rancher, 34, needs partner for frontier life. Land, livestock, future prospects. Honest work, fair treatment, no promises beyond that. He hadn't mentioned the debt. Hadn't mentioned that the land might not be his in a week. Hadn't mentioned a lot of things. The agency had written back faster than he'd expected. Prospect identified. Rowan Hale, 29, skilled trades, seeking new start. Arrival December 23rd. That was today. Silas checked the old watch in his pocket, his father's watch, the only thing of value he still owned and refused to sell. 4:30. The supply wagon from Helena was due before dark, assuming the weather held. He should have been nervous, should have been thinking about what to say, how to explain the state of things. Instead, he just felt tired and hollow, and so far past caring that when he heard the distant rattle of wagon wheels on frozen ground, he barely had the energy to turn his head. The wagon came into view through the dying light, a battered thing pulled by 2 exhausted horses. The driver, old Pete Hansen, who ran supplies between the settlements, was bundled up so thick he looked like a pile of blankets with a beard sticking out. Next to him sat a figure Silas couldn't make out clearly, wrapped in a dark coat and wool scarf. The wagon pulled up to the house. Pete climbed down with a grunt, his joints cracking loud enough to hear across the yard. "Got your delivery, Granger," Pete called out, then added under his breath, "Lord help us all." The figure in the wagon didn't wait for help. She stood, grabbed a worn canvas bag that looked like it had seen half the territories, and jumped down with the kind of easy strength that caught Silas off guard. When she unwrapped the scarf from her face, he got his first good look at her. She wasn't what he'd expected. Not soft, not delicate, not any of the things the agency letter had implied. She was tall, nearly matched his height, with broad shoulders and hands that looked like they knew work. Her face was angular, sharp-featured, with dark eyes that took in the ranch with the kind of assessment a buyer makes when they're looking at livestock. Those eyes landed on him, and there wasn't anything welcoming in them. "You Granger?" Her voice was low, rough around the edges. "That'd be me." She looked him up and down, then swept her gaze across the property again. The sagging house, the half-empty cattle pen, the barn with its missing boards. Her jaw tightened. The letter said working ranch, land, livestock, prospects. She turned back to him. "You got a different definition of those words than most people?" Pete Hansen cleared his throat. I'll be on my way." He climbed back onto the wagon with suspicious speed for a man who'd been moving like his bones were made of rust 5 seconds ago. "Wait," Rowan said, but Pete was already slapping the reins. "Sorry, miss. Gotta make it back before full dark. You two work it out." The wagon rattled away, leaving nothing but wheel ruts in the frozen mud and an awkward silence that felt heavy enough to crush bones. Rowan stood there, bag in hand, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Finally, Silas cleared his throat. "It's cold. Come inside." "Is it true?" She didn't move. "What I'm seeing here, is this the ranch you wrote about?" He could have lied. Should have, probably. Bought himself time to explain, to spin it into something that didn't sound as bad as it was. But he was too tired for that kind of performance. "It used to be," he said. "Used to be a lot of things." "And now?" "Now it's 3 days from being someone else's property." The words hung in the frozen air between them. Rowan's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Not sympathy, exactly. More like recognition. The look of someone who'd heard that kind of truth before. "You son of a bitch," she said quietly. "You brought me out here to watch you lose everything." "I brought you out here because I didn't have any other choice." The words came out harder than he meant them to. "I needed help, needed someone who what? Who'd be desperate enough to tie themselves to a sinking ship." She laughed, but there wasn't any humor in it. "Did you think I wouldn't notice? That I'd just smile and play along while the bank showed up to throw us both out? I thought I'd have more time. To lie? To figure it out." He met her eyes. "Look, I'm not proud of it. I'm not proud of much these days, but I sent that letter because I thought maybe—" He stopped, the words catching in his throat. "I thought maybe I wouldn't have to do this alone." Rowan stared at him for a long moment. Then she dropped her bag in the snow and started walking back toward the road. "Where are you going?" Silas called after her. "Away from this." She didn't turn around. "I've been lied to by better men than you, Granger. I'm not doing it again." "It's 20 miles to town. You'll freeze before you make it halfway." "I'll take my chances." "Wait." He jogged to catch up with her, grabbed her arm. She spun on him fast, and he saw her other hand come up. Saw the flash of something in her palm before she stopped herself. A knife. Small, worn handle. Blade that had been sharpened down over years of use. They both froze. "Don't touch me," she said, voice level and cold. "Not ever." "We clear?" He let go, stepped back, hands up. "Clear." She lowered the knife but didn't put it away. They stood there in the middle of the road, wind cutting through their coats, while the sky turned from bruised purple to ink black. "I don't have anywhere else to go," she said finally. The words sounded like they cost her something. "I sold everything I had to get the train fare out here. Everything. Because your goddamn letter said prospects and future and honest work." She laughed again, that same bitter sound. "I should have known better." "I'm sorry," Silas said, and he meant it. "I should have told you the truth." "Yeah, you should have." She looked back toward the ranch, then up at the darkening sky. Snow had started to fall, light flakes that caught in her hair. "How much time did you say?" 3 days? "And how much do you owe?" 3,847. "Yeah, I heard you the first time." She was quiet for a moment, thinking. "That's not impossible." He almost laughed. "Might as well be." "You sell anything? Cattle, equipment, land rights?" "Everything that wasn't nailed down. Some things that were." "What have you got left?" 23 head of cattle that won't fetch more than $10 each. Tools that are mostly busted. A barn that's held together with hope and horse shit. He paused. "And a forge." Her head snapped up at that. "Say that again?" "There's a forge. Old one, out behind the barn. My grandfather built it when he first settled here." Used to do blacksmith work for the neighboring ranches, back when there were neighboring ranches. Silas shrugged. Hasn't been fired up in years. I don't know the first thing about working iron. Something changed in Rowan's face. Not hope exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something fierce. Show me, she said. They walked back through the snow, and Silas felt the strangest sensation, like he'd just stepped off a cliff and hadn't hit bottom yet. Didn't know if there was a bottom or if he'd just keep falling forever. The forge was in a shed behind the barn, protected from the worst of the weather, but still half buried in dust and neglect. Silas pushed open the door, and the hinges screamed like they'd forgotten what moving felt like. Inside, it was dark and cold and smelled like old metal and older dreams. He lit the lantern he'd brought, and the light pushed back the shadows enough to see. The forge itself was a monster, a great brick beast with a chimney that went up through the roof. The bellows hung limp on their chains, leather cracked with age. Tools littered the walls, hammers of every size, tongs, chisels, files. Most were rusted. Some were broken. But they were there. Rowan walked through the space like she was in a church. She ran her hands over the anvil, tested the weight of a hammer, examined the fire brick inside the forge itself. Silas watched her move and realized this wasn't curiosity. This was knowledge. This was someone who understood what they were looking at. This is good ironwork, she said quietly. Your grandfather knew what he was doing. You know forges? She looked at him, and for the first time since she'd arrived, there was something in her eyes besides anger or suspicion. My father was a blacksmith, best in 3 counties. Her voice softened. He taught me everything. How to read metal, how to hear the fire, how to make iron do what you needed it to do. Why'd you leave? The softness disappeared, because the men in our town decided they didn't want a woman at the forge, said it wasn't proper, said it was bad luck. She set the hammer down harder than necessary. They drove us out of business. Pa died 6 months later. I've been moving ever since, looking for somewhere that'd let me work. Out here, people care less about proper and more about survival. That's what I'm counting on. She turned to face him fully. I can work this forge. I can fix tools, make parts, do custom work. If you let me, I can turn this into something that brings money in. In 3 days? No. She shook her head. But I can start. And if you're serious about not losing this place, you'll help me. Silas looked around the shed, at the years of dust and rust and abandonment, looked at this woman who'd appeared out of the winter dark with a knife in her pocket and fire in her eyes, thought about the foreclosure notice nailed to his door and the watch ticking in his pocket and all the ways this could go wrong. I'll help, he said, but we do this with no more lies. You want truth, I'll give you truth. But you do the same. Rowan considered that. Then she stuck out her hand. Deal. But I'm staying in the house, not the barn, and I get my own room with a lock on the door. Done. They shook. Her grip was strong, calloused and warm despite the cold. When she let go, she looked back at the forge with an expression he couldn't quite read. We're going to need coal, she said, and I'll need to see what tools can be salvaged, and we need to get the word out that there's a smith working again. I know some folks who might bring work. Good. She picked up one of the hammers, tested its balance, set it back down. I'll start tomorrow before dawn. You should get some sleep. What about you? I've got work to do. Silas wanted to argue, wanted to tell her to rest, that there'd be time in the morning, but something in the set of her shoulders told him it wouldn't matter what he said. She'd made up her mind. He led her back to the house, showed her the spare room. It was small, cold, and the bed frame was held together with wire where the joints had broken. She took one look at it and nodded like it was the finest hotel room in San Francisco. There's blankets in the chest, he said from the doorway, and I'll get a fire going in the stove. I can manage. I know. But I'll do it anyway. He paused. Look, I know I started this all wrong, and I know saying sorry doesn't fix that. But I am. Sorry, I mean. You deserve better than lies in a dying ranch. Rowan turned to look at him, and in the lamplight her face was softer than it had been outside. Tired. Human. We've all got things we're running from, Granger, she said. I didn't come out here just for prospects. I came because I didn't have anywhere else to go either. She sat down on the edge of the bed, and it creaked under her weight. So maybe we're even. Maybe we're both desperate enough to try something stupid. Like saving a ranch in 3 days? Yeah, like that. Silas nodded. I'll see you in the morning. You'll see me before that. He left her there and went to start the fire, feeding kindling into the stove until it caught and spread. The house warmed slowly, grudgingly, like it had forgotten how. He stood there for a while, listening to the wind outside and the creak of floorboards upstairs where Rowan was settling in. It occurred to him that this was the first time in 2 years the house hadn't felt completely empty. He fell asleep in his chair by the stove, his father's watch in his hand, and dreamed of fire and iron and the sound of hammer on anvil. When Silas woke, it was still dark. For a moment he couldn't place what had pulled him out of sleep. Then he heard it again. A rhythmic pounding, metal on metal, echoing across the frozen yard. He bolted upright, confusion giving way to realization. The forge. He grabbed his coat and boots, stumbled outside into the pre-dawn cold. Snow had fallen through the night, covering everything in a thin white sheet that crunched under his feet. The sound grew louder as he approached the shed, and when he pushed open the door, heat and light hit him like a physical thing. The forge was alive. Fire roared in the brick chamber, painting everything in shades of orange and gold. The bellows worked in steady rhythm, pumping air that made the coals glow white-hot. And at the anvil, hammer in hand, stood Rowan. She tied her hair back and rolled up her sleeves despite the cold outside. Sweat gleamed on her forearms as she worked, striking heated metal with precision that turned each blow into music. The piece she was working, a bent hinge from one of the barn doors, was already straightening, transforming from junk into something useful. She didn't stop when he entered, didn't even look up, just kept working, her focus absolute. Silas stood there and watched the way she read the metal's color, pulling it from the fire at exactly the right moment. Watched how she turned it on the anvil, how each strike was deliberate, confident. Watched her face in the firelight, hard with concentration, and realized he'd underestimated her completely. This wasn't a woman desperate for a new start. This was a woman who knew exactly what she was worth. "How long have you been out here?" he asked when she finally quenched the piece in the slack tub, sending up a hiss of steam. "Since before dawn." She examined the hinge, nodded, set it aside. "Got the fire started around 4, had to clear out a nest of mice first, and one of the bellows chains needed replacing, but I made it work." "You should have woken me." "Why? You know how to fire a forge?" "No, but then I didn't need you." She grabbed another piece of scrap metal from the pile she'd apparently gathered. "I need you now, though. I've got a list." She pulled a folded paper from her pocket and handed it to him. He opened it to find a detailed inventory written in careful script. "That's everything in this shed that's worth salvaging, everything that's broken, and everything I'll need to actually make this work." She pointed to a section near the bottom. "Those items there. I need you to ride out today and spread the word. Tell every rancher, farmer, and homesteader within 20 miles that there's a smith working at the Granger place. Tell them I can fix tools, repair equipment, make custom pieces. Tell them I work cheap and fast. They're going to want to know who you are. Tell them my name's Rowan Hale and I was trained by the best smith in Ohio. Tell them if they don't believe a woman can work iron, they can bring their broken shit and watch me fix it right in front of them." She met his eyes. "And tell them I'll beat any price from Barrett Crow's operation by half." Silas felt something shift in his chest. Crow. Of course, Barrett Crow owned the biggest cattle operation in the territory, and he'd been circling the Granger Ranch like a vulture for 2 years. He was the one who'd bought up most of the neighboring properties during the drought, consolidating power, building an empire. He was also the biggest moneylender in the region, and Silas had no doubt the man had his fingers in the bank's decision to foreclose now rather than give more time. Crow had a forge operation too, a whole facility with 3 smiths working full-time. They charged premium prices and everyone paid because there was no alternative. Until now. "You're going to make an enemy," Silas said. "I've had worse enemies than some cattle baron." Rowan picked up her hammer again. "Are you going to help me or not?" He looked at the list in his hand, then at the woman standing in the forge his grandfather had built. Thought about pride and stupidity and all the ways this could fail. "I'll start writing before full light," he said. She nodded once, then turned back to her work. The hammer rang out again, steady and sure, and Silas headed back to the house to gather supplies for the ride. The sun was just starting to break over the horizon when he saddled his horse. an old mare named Bess who'd seen better days but still had strength in her legs. He rode out with Rowan's list in his saddlebag and something that felt dangerously close to hope in his chest. The day was brutal. He rode from ranch to ranch, farm to farm, anywhere there might be someone who needed smith work. Some folks were suspicious, some were curious, some laughed in his face. But enough listened. Enough said they'd come by, or they had things that needed fixing, or they'd spread the word. By the time he made it back to his own property, it was nearly dark and he was half frozen. Smoke poured from the forge chimney, and he could hear the hammer before he even dismounted. Inside, Rowan had transformed the workspace. The floor was swept, tools organized, several pieces of completed work lined up on a bench. She looked up when he entered, face smudged with soot, and there was something in her expression that made his breath catch. Pride. Not the kind that got you in trouble, but the kind you earned. "How'd it go?" she asked. "Got word out to maybe 30 places. Some will come, some won't." He pulled off his gloves. "But I'd say half will at least stop by to see if you're real." "Good enough." She set down her hammer. "I've got about 30 hours of work lined up already from people who saw the smoke and came to investigate. Nothing huge, but it's a start." "What do we do when they come?" "You let me handle the work. You handle the people, take names, make notes of what they need, give them prices." She wiped her hands on her apron. "And you keep Barrett Crow away if he shows up." "He'll show up," Silas said. "Man like that doesn't like competition. Then he'll learn something new." Rowan picked up a piece she'd been working on, a small decorative hook, twisted metal formed into an elegant spiral. "This isn't about competition. This is about survival. His ego versus our existence. I know which one matters more." Silas took the hook from her, feeling the perfect balance of it, the smooth finish despite being made from scrap. "You're really good at this." "I know." She said it matter of fact, no false modesty. "My father taught me to do it right or not at all. I've been working iron since I was 12. There's not much I can't make or fix." "Why didn't you find work somewhere else? Another town, another smith who'd take you on?" Her expression darkened. "You think I didn't try? I spent 3 years going from town to town, territory to territory. Every time it was the same. Men don't trust women with fire and metal. They think we'll break under the work, or we'll bring bad luck, or we're trying to take jobs from men who need them more." She took the hook back from him. "After Pa died, I kept going for a while. Then I just got tired of fighting the same battle in different places." "So you came here?" "So I came here," she agreed. "Figured the frontier might be different. Figured wrong, apparently, but at least now I've got 3 days to prove I'm worth keeping around." "It's not 3 days anymore," Silas said quietly. "It's 2. The words hung between them, heavy with everything they meant. 2 days to save a ranch. 2 days to earn enough money to pay a debt that had taken 2 years to pile up. 2 days to turn scrap metal and determination into something resembling a miracle. "Then we'd better get back to work," Rowan said. And they did. The next morning, people started arriving. First came old Jacob Marsh from the spread 3 miles north, hauling a broken plow blade that he'd been nursing along for 2 seasons. Rowan took one look at it, quoted him a price, and had it fixed before he'd finished his coffee. He paid in cash and left shaking his head, muttering about how his own smith would have charged twice that and taken 3 days. Then came the widow Patterson with a set of gate hinges that wouldn't close right. Then the Hanson brothers with tools that needed sharpening and handles that needed replacing. Then Samuel Cross with a broken wagon axle and a story about how he'd been waiting 2 weeks for Crow's operation to get around to it. Word spread fast on the frontier. By noon, there were 4 people waiting, and by evening, Rowan had worked through all of them and taken orders for custom pieces to be delivered after Christmas. Silas watched her work through the day, watched the way she talked to customers. Direct, honest, no sugarcoating. She didn't try to charm them or play up being a woman in a man's trade. She just showed them good work, gave them fair prices, and let the iron speak for itself. It worked. By the time the sun set on December 24th, they'd made $340. Silas counted it twice, spread out on the kitchen table in stacks of bills and coins. $340 in 1 day. It was more money than he'd seen in months, and it wasn't nearly enough. Rowan sat across from him, exhausted, her hands wrapped in strips of cloth where blisters had formed despite her calluses. "We need 11 times this much," she said flatly. By tomorrow. I know. That's not going to happen. I know that too. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of mathematics pressing down on them. Outside, snow fell again, covering the world in white that looked peaceful if you didn't know better. There's got to be something, Rowan said finally, some angle we're not seeing. I've been looking for that angle for 2 years, Silas said. If it existed, I would have found it. She stood up abruptly, walked to the window, stared out at the dark. When I was learning the trade, Pa used to tell me there were 2 kinds of blacksmiths, the ones who made things people needed and the ones who made things people wanted. The first kind made steady money. The second kind made fortunes. What's the difference? Need is about survival. Want is about dreams. She turned back to him. People will pay a fair price for a fixed hinge. They'll pay 10 times that for something beautiful that makes them feel like they're more than just surviving. Silas felt something stir in his chest. You're talking about custom work. Art pieces. I'm talking about the difference between $3 and $30. Her eyes were bright now, fever bright with an idea taking shape. There's a Christmas market in Red Hollow tomorrow, biggest one in the territory. Ranchers, miners, merchants, everyone with money shows up to buy gifts, show off, make deals. If we could get there, it's 40 miles, Silas interrupted. Through mountain passes in winter, we'd have to leave tonight. Then we leave tonight. With what? We don't have anything to sell except tools and livestock. We have this. She pointed at the shed where the forge glowed. We have me. I can make pieces tonight, small things, custom work, the kind of items wealthy people pay premium prices for. Decorative iron, gifts, art. We take everything we can make in the next 8 hours, haul it through the night, and sell it at that market tomorrow. That's insane. That's the only option left. She moved toward him, her intensity filling the room. Silas, we've got nothing to lose. If we stay here, the bank takes the ranch on the 26th, no matter what. But if we go, if we try this, we could lose it even faster, he finished. What if nobody buys? What if we spend what little we have on supplies and travel and come back with nothing? Then we're exactly where we started, except we'll know we tried everything. She grabbed his hand, and he felt the heat of her, the strength. I've been running from fights for 3 years. I'm tired of running, aren't you? He thought about his mother's words about pride and stupidity, thought about his father's hands on that watch, wound every morning for 40 years, thought about the ranch and the land and all the ways things could go wrong. Then he thought about the sound of the hammer on the anvil and the way Rowan looked when she worked, and the fact that for the first time in 2 years he didn't feel completely alone. 8 hours, he said. You can make enough in 8 hours? I can try like hell. Then let's try. They moved like they'd been working together for years instead of days. Silas gathered supplies while Rowan fired up the forge hotter than he'd seen it yet. She pulled out pieces of good iron she'd been saving, metal that had clean lines and took polish well. I'm going to make 6 pieces, she said, already heating the first. Small enough to transport, large enough to be impressive, things that say quality and craftsmanship. You understand? I understand you're betting everything on strangers with money buying pretty metal. That's exactly what I'm doing. She pulled the first piece from the fire, and it glowed like a fallen star. Now, shut up and let me work. He did. Sat there in the forge shed and watched her transform iron into something more. Watched her make a candle holder with 3 branches that spiraled up like tree limbs. Watched her form a set of fire tools with handles wrapped in intricate wire. Watched her create a wall hook shaped like a leaping horse, so perfectly balanced it seemed to move in the firelight. She worked through the night without stopping, her focus absolute. Silas dozed in fits, woke to the sound of hammer strikes, dozed again. Time became strange, measured in the rhythm of her work. When dawn broke on Christmas morning, Rowan set down her hammer for the last time. 6 pieces sat on the bench, cooled and polished. They caught the early light and threw it back transformed. They're beautiful, Silas said, and his voice sounded rough with exhaustion and something else. They're the best I can do, Rowan replied. Now, let's hope that's enough. They loaded the pieces into the wagon along with blankets to protect them, supplies for the journey, and the $340 they'd earned. Everything they had. Every last bit. Silas hitched Bess and her partner, an older gelding named Rusty, to the wagon. The horses looked as tired as he felt, but they'd make the trip. They had to. Rowan climbed up beside him, and they started out as the sun cleared the horizon. Christmas morning, and they were hauling a wagon load of hope through frozen mountain passes toward a market that might save them or seal their defeat. The journey was brutal. The passes were iced over. The wind was cruel, and twice they had to stop to clear fallen branches from the road. But they kept moving, kept pushing, because stopping meant giving up, and giving up meant losing everything. They made it to Red Hollow just before noon. The market was everything Rowan had promised, a massive gathering in the center of town, with stalls and tents and people everywhere. The air smelled like roasted meat and pine and money. Lots of money. They found a spot on the edge of the market and set up their wares on a table borrowed from a local merchant. Rowan arranged the pieces carefully, making sure each one caught the light. Then they stood back and waited. And waited. People walked past. Some glanced over. Some didn't even look. An hour passed, then two. Silas felt hope beginning to curdle into panic. Maybe this was a mistake, he said quietly. Maybe, Rowan agreed, but we're here now, so we wait. Then a rancher stopped. Big man, well-dressed, the kind of person who'd done well enough to afford luxuries. He picked up the horse hook, turned it over in his hands, examined the craftsmanship. "Who made this?" he asked. "I did," Rowan said. The man looked skeptical. "You're a smith? Best one you'll meet today." She said it with such flat confidence that the man's skepticism wavered. "How much?" She named a price. The man whistled low. "That's more than Crow charges." "Crow's work isn't as good." "Bold claim." "True claim." Rowan picked up the fire tools, showed him the detail work. "You want something that'll last and look good doing it? You buy from me. You want something that'll break in a year? Go see Crow." The man laughed. Then he pulled out his wallet and paid cash. "I'll take the horse hook and those fire tools. And give me your name. I might want more pieces." "Rowan Hale, working out of the Granger Ranch." He tipped his hat and walked off with his purchases, and suddenly there were 3 more people at the table. Word spread the way fire does, fast and hungry. Within an hour, they'd sold 4 of the 6 pieces. Within 2 hours, all 6 were gone, and Rowan was taking orders for custom work, writing down names and specifications, quoting prices that made Silas's head spin. People fought to get to their table. A mine owner bought 3 custom pieces sight unseen. A wealthy widow ordered an entire set of decorative railings for her townhouse. A hotel owner wanted gates and balustrades and didn't care what it cost. The money piled up. Bills and coins and promissory notes. More than Silas had seen in his life, let alone in one afternoon. He was counting it for the 3rd time when he felt someone watching. Looked up to see a man standing just beyond the crowd. Tall, well-dressed, with the kind of face that smiled but never meant it. Barrett Crow. The cattle baron stood there with 2 of his men, watching the chaos at the Granger table with an expression that went beyond anger into something colder and more dangerous. Their eyes met across the market, and Crow's smile widened. Then he turned and walked away, and Silas felt ice settle in his gut that had nothing to do with the winter air. "We've got a problem," he said to Rowan. But she was already looking at the spot where Crow had been standing, and her jaw was set in a line that said she understood exactly what kind of problem they had. "Let him come," she said quietly. "We're not done yet." By the time the market closed at sunset, they'd earned $4,200. More than enough to pay the debt. More than enough to have a cushion for winter. More than enough to prove that maybe, just maybe, they could survive this. They counted it twice, then loaded up the empty wagon and started the journey home through the dark. Neither of them spoke much. They were too exhausted, too wound up with the strangeness of success after so much failure. It was well past midnight when they finally pulled up to the ranch. The house looked exactly as they'd left it, dark, cold, waiting. But somehow it felt different now, less like a graveyard and more like a place where something might actually live. "We did it," Silas said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "We did," Rowan agreed. Then she turned to look at him in the moonlight. "But this isn't over. Crow saw what happened today. He's not going to let this stand." "What can he do? We've got the money. We can pay the bank tomorrow." "Men like Crow don't need the bank to hurt you." She climbed down from the wagon, wincing as her muscles protested. "We need to be careful, both of us." They unloaded in silence, carried the money inside, locked it in the old safe that Silas's father had kept in the office. Then Rowan headed for her room, and Silas collapsed in the chair by the cold stove. He must have slept because he jolted awake to the sound of horses. Multiple horses, moving fast across frozen ground. He grabbed his rifle and made it to the window in time to see 6 riders pull up in the yard. Barrett Crow sat on the lead horse, and even in the pre-dawn dark, Silas could see the man was smiling. This wasn't over, not even close. Silas's hands were steady on the rifle, but his heart kicked like a mule. 6 riders in the yard at dawn on the day after Christmas meant trouble, and Barrett Crow didn't make social calls. He heard footsteps behind him, quick, light. Rowan appeared at his shoulder, still in the clothes she'd slept in, her knife already in her hand. "How many?" she asked. 6, Crow's leading them. "Armed?" "I'd bet on it." She moved to the other window, peered out. "They're just sitting there, waiting for us to come out." "Yeah." Silas's jaw tightened. "Man wants to make a show of it." "Then let's not give him one." Rowan headed for the door. Silas grabbed her arm. "Wait, we don't know what he's planning." "I know exactly what he's planning." She pulled free, her eyes hard. "He's planning to intimidate us, make us scared, maybe rough us up a little if we don't bow down properly." She checked her knife, slid it back into her belt. "I've dealt with men like Crow my whole life. They only respect one thing." "What's that?" "Someone who won't blink first." She walked out into the yard before he could stop her, boots crunching through snow that reflected the pale morning light. Silas cursed under his breath and followed, rifle lowered but ready. Crow sat his horse like he owned the world and was considering whether to keep it or burn it down for fun. He was maybe 50, with silver threading through dark hair and a face that would have been handsome if not for the cruelty in his eyes. The men flanking him were ranch hands, the kind who earned their pay with fists as often as ropes. "Well now," Crow said, his voice carrying that smooth confidence men get when they've never been truly afraid. "Didn't expect to see you two up so early. Figured you'd be sleeping off your big market success." "State your business, Crow," Silas said. "It's early, and I'm not in the mood." "Your mood doesn't much concern me, Granger." Crow's smile didn't reach his eyes. "What concerns me is hearing that you and your lady friend here have been undercutting my prices and stealing my customers." "Stealing implies they belong to you," Rowan said flatly. "Last I checked, people were free to buy from whoever they wanted." Crow's gaze shifted to her, and something ugly moved behind his expression. "You must be the Smith I've been hearing about." "The woman." He said it like the word itself was an insult. "Heard you made quite a scene at Red Hollow yesterday." "Made some sales," Rowan corrected. "That's not the same as a scene." "Depends on your perspective." Crow leaned forward in his saddle. "See, from my perspective, you showed up in my territory, set up shop in a dying ranch, and started taking work that should have come to me. That's bad business. Bad for everyone." "Your territory?" Silas felt his temper rising, the kind of heat that made smart men do stupid things. "This is open country, Crow. You don't own the whole damn valley." "Don't I?" Crow gestured broadly. "I own the Patterson place, the old marsh property, the Henderson spread. Hell, I own or hold paper on half the ranches within 50 miles. And in a few days, I was set to own this one, too." His smile sharpened. "Until you two got clever." "We got lucky," Rowan said. "And we worked hard." "That's not clever. That's just how things work." "Things work how I say they work." Crow's voice went cold. "And right now, things say you're causing problems. Problems I don't appreciate." One of Crow's men shifted in his saddle, and Silas saw the glint of a pistol on the man's hip. His grip tightened on the rifle. "You came here to threaten us," Silas said. "So go ahead and threaten. Then get off my land." "Threats are such an ugly word." Crow straightened. "I prefer to think of it as offering friendly advice. See, running a smithing operation takes more than just knowing how to swing a hammer. It takes connections, supplies, protection." He paused. "Things can go wrong. Fires, accidents, equipment failures. Especially for operations that don't have proper backing. We'll take our chances," Rowan said. "Will you?" Crow's eyes fixed on her. "Because from where I sit, you're a woman alone on a failing ranch with a partner who's already proven he can't keep his affairs in order. That's a dangerous position to be in. Vulnerable." "I'm not alone." Rowan's voice dropped to something that could cut glass. "And I'm not vulnerable. And if you or any of your men set foot on this property uninvited again, you'll find out exactly how dangerous I can be." The temperature in the yard dropped about 20 degrees. Crow's men exchanged glances, and one of them, a big man with a scar across his jaw, actually laughed. "You threatening us?" Scarface asked. "Little girl like you?" "I don't make threats," Rowan said. "I make promises. And I promise that if you come back here looking for trouble, you'll leave with more than you bargained for." Crow studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded slowly, like she'd confirmed something he'd been wondering about. "You've got spine," he said. "I'll give you that. But spine doesn't stop bullets, and it doesn't put out fires, and it sure as hell doesn't keep you safe when accidents happen." He gathered his reins. "Think about what I said. About backing. About protection. My offer to buy this place still stands. I'd give you fair market value, Granger. More than fair considering. And your lady friend here, well, I could always use another Smith at my operation, if she knows her place." "I know my place," Rowan said quietly. "It's wherever I say it is. And right now it's here, on this ranch, doing work that's apparently good enough to scare you into riding out before dawn to make threats." Crow's face darkened. "You just made a very stupid mistake." "Wouldn't be my first." Rowan crossed her arms. "Now are you leaving, or do we need to help you find the road?" For a second, Silas thought Crow might actually do something. The man's hand drifted toward his belt, and the tension in the yard pulled tight enough to snap. But then Crow smiled again, that cold businessman's smile that said he'd already written off the loss and moved to the next calculation. "We'll be going," he said. "But this conversation isn't over. Not by a long shot." He turned his horse. "Merry Christmas, folks. Hope you enjoy it while it lasts." They rode out, 6 horses kicking up snow and frozen mud. Silas watched until they disappeared over the rise, then finally let himself breathe. "That went well," he said, trying for humor and landing somewhere around nausea. "That went exactly how I expected." Rowan turned back toward the house. "He'll be back. Or he'll send someone. Men like him don't handle rejection well." "So what do we do?" "We go to the bank, pay the debt, and secure this property legally." She paused at the door. "Then we get ready for whatever he throws at us next." They spent the morning getting ready. Silas cleaned weapons he hadn't touched in years. His father's old shotgun, a pistol that needed oil, the rifle. Rowan worked in the forge, and when he checked on her around noon, he found she'd made something that definitely wasn't decorative ironwork. "Are those spikes?" he asked, looking at the row of wicked metal points lined up on the workbench. "Security measures," she corrected, "for the windows and doors. Anyone tries to break in, they'll regret it." "You really think he'll try something?" "I think he's used to getting what he wants, and we just told him no in front of his men." She held up one of the spikes, tested its point. "That kind of humiliation demands a response. Question is just what kind and when. You've dealt with this before." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. Every time some man decided a woman at the forge was an insult to his masculinity. Every time a competitor decided the only way to beat me was to drive me out. She set the spike down. "I learned to protect myself. Learned to fight dirty when I had to. That's how you survive when the rules aren't written in your favor." Silas thought about that, about all the ways the frontier was supposed to be different, supposed to be about what you could do rather than who you were. But people brought their prejudices west, same as they brought their furniture, and sometimes those old ideas were harder to kill than any amount of wilderness. "For what it's worth," he said, "I'm glad you're here, even with all the trouble it's causing." Rowan looked at him, something shifting in her expression. "You mean that?" "Yeah, I do." He picked up one of the spikes. "This place was dying before you showed up. Maybe it still will. But at least now it'll go down fighting." "It's not going down." She took the spike back from him. "Not if I have anything to say about it." They finished the security preparations by mid-afternoon, then hitched up the wagon for the ride into town. The bank closed at 4, and Silas wanted to be there well before that. Wanted to see the look on the banker's face when they paid off a debt everyone had assumed was unpayable. The ride into town was quiet. They'd both been up most of the night, and exhaustion was starting to catch up with them. But there was something else too, a kind of nervous energy that came from knowing they were about to do something that couldn't be undone. "What are you going to do after?" Rowan asked as the town came into view. "After we pay it off, I mean. You going to rebuild the cattle operation? I don't know. Silas hadn't let himself think that far ahead. Maybe. Or maybe we focus on the forge work. Seems like there's more money in that anyway. We, she repeated. You said we. He realized what he'd done. Made an assumption about a future that involved both of them when they'd never actually discussed what happened after the immediate crisis was over. I just meant, I know what you meant. She looked at him. And yeah, if you're asking. I'm asking. Then we build something together. Ranch and forge. Whatever works. She paused. But I need my own space. The forge is mine to run how I see fit. You don't question my prices, you don't second-guess my work, and you don't ever speak for me to customers. Clear? Clear. He felt something settle in his chest, a weight he hadn't known he was carrying lifting. And I run the ranch side, livestock, land management, that whole piece. Deal. She stuck out her hand and they shook on it right there in the wagon, a partnership sealed with calloused palms, and the understanding that they were both too stubborn to fail. The bank was a solid brick building on Main Street, the kind of structure that was meant to look permanent and trustworthy. Silas had always hated it. Had hated walking through those doors knowing he was begging for time, for mercy, for anything that would keep his head above water for one more month. Today was different. Today he walked in with his back straight and $4,000 in a leather satchel. The banker, a thin man named Thaddeus Morrison, with spectacles and the kind of mustache that looked like it required daily maintenance, glanced up from his desk. His expression went from mild interest to shock in about 2 seconds. Granger, Morrison said, standing quickly. I didn't expect to see you today. Morrison. Why not? It's the 26th. Deadline day. Silas set the satchel on the desk with a heavy thump. Come to settle my account. Morrison's eyes went to the satchel, then to Rowan standing behind Silas, then back to Silas. Settle your account. That's what I said. Silas opened the satchel, pulled out stacks of bills. $3,847, plus whatever interest accrued over the last few days. Figure $4,000 should cover it, and then some. Morrison sat down slowly, like his legs had forgotten how to hold him. He started counting the money, his hands moving mechanically while his brain tried to catch up. Where did you... Morrison stopped himself. I'm sorry, that's none of my business. This is just unexpected. Life's full of surprises, Rowan said from behind Silas. Some of them are even good. Morrison finished counting, made notes in his ledger, then pulled out a heavy stamp and a piece of official-looking paper. He filled in details with careful handwriting, stamped it 3 times, then signed it with a flourish that seemed too grand for the moment. This is your receipt, Morrison said, sliding the paper across the desk. Debt paid in full. The foreclosure notice is void as of this moment, and the property remains in your name free and clear. He paused. Congratulations, Mr. Granger. Most people don't come back from this kind of situation. Most people don't have a partner like mine, Silas said, and felt Rowan's hand briefly touch his shoulder. They left the bank with the receipt tucked safely in Silas's coat pocket, and for the first time in 2 years, he felt like he could breathe all the way down to the bottom of his lungs. We should celebrate, Rowan said as they climbed back into the wagon. Get a real meal somewhere, maybe a drink. There's a place called the Broken Spur. Food's decent, whiskey's strong. Sounds perfect. The Broken Spur was exactly what frontier saloons always were. Rough wood, rougher clientele, and the kind of atmosphere that said violence was always one wrong word away. But the food was hot, and the portions were generous, and after 2 days of exhaustion and triumph, they didn't care about ambiance. They found a table in the back, away from the main crowd, and ordered steak and potatoes and coffee strong enough to strip paint. The food came fast, and they ate in comfortable silence, too hungry for conversation. Silas was halfway through his meal when he noticed the man at the bar watching them. Big guy, unfamiliar, with the look of someone who'd been paid to pay attention. He wasn't being subtle about it either, just standing there with a beer he wasn't drinking, eyes tracking their every move. We've got company, Silas said quietly. Rowan didn't turn around. The one at the bar or the 2 by the door? You saw them? Hard to miss. They've been watching since we walked in. She cut another piece of steak. Crow's men, you think? Probably. Man doesn't waste time. So what do? We finish our meal, then we leave, and we don't let them separate us. They ate quickly after that, the food losing some of its appeal under hostile observation. When they were done, Silas paid the tab and they headed for the door, staying close together. The two men by the entrance moved to block their path. They were younger than the man at the bar, harder looking, with the kind of scars you got from fighting for entertainment rather than necessity. "Leaving so soon?" the taller one said. He had a voice like gravel in a tin can. "We were hoping to have a word." "We're not interested in conversation," Silas said, his hand drifting toward the pistol at his belt. "That's too bad." The shorter one grinned, showing teeth that had seen better days. "Because Mr. Crow, he's real interested in talking to you two. Thinks you might have misunderstood his offer this morning." "We understood fine," Rowan said. "The answer's still no." "See, that's where you're wrong." Gravel Voice stepped closer. "The answer's whatever Mr. Crow says it is. And right now, he says you're coming with us for a friendly conversation." "And if we decline?" Silas asked. "Then the conversation gets less friendly real fast." The saloon had gone quiet. Other patrons were watching now, that particular frontier attention that meant everyone was calculating whether this was entertainment or something they'd need to be involved in. The bartender had his hand under the counter where Silas knew he kept a shotgun. "We're leaving," Silas said firmly. "You can step aside or you can get moved. Your choice." Gravel Voice's hand went to his belt. "That's a mistake." He didn't finish the sentence because Rowan moved. Fast, brutal, and completely unexpected. She grabbed the man's wrist, twisted it at an angle that made joints pop, and kicked his knee hard enough that he went down with a scream. The knife she'd pulled was at his throat before his partner could even react. "Touch your weapon, and he dies," Rowan said calmly to the shorter man. "Probably slowly because I'm tired and my aim might be off." The shorter man froze, hands half raised. "You crazy bitch! That's the second time today someone's questioned my judgment." Rowan pressed the knife harder, and a line of red appeared on Gravel Voice's throat. "Starting to get tiresome. Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell Mr. Crow that we're not interested in his offers, we're not interested in his threats, and we're especially not interested in being grabbed by his hired muscle. Can you remember all that, or should I write it down?" "I'll remember," the shorter man said through gritted teeth. "Good." Rowan looked down at the man under her knife. "You're going to stay right here on the floor until we're gone. You're going to count to 100, real slow, and then you're going to go back to your boss and explain how a woman half your size put you down in front of a whole saloon full of witnesses. Think you can handle that?" Gravel Voice managed a nod, fear bright in his eyes now. Rowan released him, stepped back, and sheathed her knife in one smooth motion. Then she walked out of the saloon like she'd just finished a pleasant dinner conversation. Silas followed, his heart hammering. The man at the bar made no move to stop them, and neither did anyone else. By the time they reached the wagon, Rowan was already climbing up. "You're full of surprises," Silas said as he took the reins. "My father didn't just teach me blacksmithing." Rowan's hands were shaking slightly now, adrenaline catching up with her. "When you're a woman working in a man's trade, you learn to defend yourself or you don't survive. I learned." "Where?" "Men who were willing to teach a stubborn girl who wouldn't take no for an answer." She flexed her fingers. "Took years, cost me a lot of bruises and a broken nose. But I learned." They rode out of town at a pace just shy of running, neither of them willing to stay any longer than necessary. The sun was setting by the time they made it back to the ranch, painting the snow in shades of orange and red that would have been beautiful if Silas's nerves hadn't been wound tight enough to snap. "He's going to escalate," Rowan said as they unhitched the horses. "After today, after what happened at the saloon, Crow can't let that stand." "I know. So we need to be ready." "I know that too." They worked together to secure the property, checking the spike-reinforced windows, making sure the doors were solid. Rowan built up the fire in the forge and kept it burning hot, and Silas realized she was turning it into a watch post as much as a workplace. "You planning to sleep out here?" he asked. "Someone should." She stirred the coals, sending sparks spiraling up. "If they come tonight, we'll see them coming. And if they try anything, well, I've got plenty of tools that make decent weapons. I'll stay with you. You need rest. So do you." He grabbed another log for the fire. "We're partners, remember? That means we watch each other's backs." Rowan looked like she wanted to argue, but finally just nodded. Fine. But first watch is mine. You get some sleep. I won't be able to. Try anyway. He did, stretched out on a pile of old blankets in the corner of the forge shed, while Rowan worked on small pieces and kept the fire burning. The sound of her hammer was rhythmic, almost soothing, and despite himself, Silas felt his eyes growing heavy. He woke to the sound of breaking glass. Silas was on his feet before his brain caught up, grabbing for his rifle. The forge was still bright with fire, but Rowan was at the door, peering out at the house. "What happened?" he asked. "Rock through the kitchen window." Her voice was tight. "Big one. Came from the direction of the road. Anyone still out there?" "If they are, they're staying hidden." Silas moved to her side, scanning the darkness beyond the forge's light. The house was maybe 50 yards away, and the broken window was visible even from here. A dark hole in the side of the building, glass scattered on the snow below. "Warning shot," he said, "telling us they can reach us whenever they want." "Or testing our response." Rowan grabbed a lantern. "Either way, we need to check it out." They approached the house carefully, weapons ready, moving through pools of shadow and lamplight. The broken window stared at them like an accusing eye, and when they got close enough, Silas saw the rock lying in the middle of the kitchen floor, surrounded by scattered glass. There was paper tied to it. A note. Rowan picked it up, unfolded it, held it to the lamplight. Her expression went hard as stone. "What's it say?" Silas asked. She handed it to him without comment. The handwriting was rough but legible. "Last chance. Sell or suffer. The choice is yours, but the outcome isn't." No signature, but they both knew who'd sent it. "He's trying to scare us into running," Rowan said. "Make us feel unsafe, make us think it's not worth fighting." "Is it working?" She looked at him, and in the lamplight her face was all sharp angles and determination. "What do you think?" "I think we need to send a message back." Silas crumpled the note. "Let him know we're not going anywhere." "What kind of message?" "The kind that makes it clear this property is defended. Permanently." He walked to the broken window, looked out at the dark. "Tomorrow, I'm writing to every neighbor within 20 miles. I'm telling them what's happening, asking for support. Crow might have money and men, but he doesn't have community. We build that. We've got something stronger than any threat he can make. And in the meantime? In the meantime, we don't sleep. We keep watch. And we make damn sure anyone who comes onto this property uninvited leaves wishing they hadn't." They spent the rest of the night on alert, taking turns watching from the forge while the other rested. No one else came, but the broken window stayed dark and accusing, a reminder that their brief moment of victory had already passed into something harder. Dawn came cold and gray. Silas saddled Bess while Rowan worked in the forge, the familiar sound of her hammer somehow reassuring despite everything. "I'll be back before dark," he said as he prepared to leave. "Be careful. Crow's got people everywhere." "I will." He paused. "And Rowan, thank you. For yesterday. For everything." "Thank me when we've actually won," she said, but there was something softer in her expression. "Now go. Talk to people. Build that community you mentioned. We're going to need it." He rode out as the sun cleared the horizon, heading first to the marsh place. Old Jacob was working in his barn when Silas arrived, and the surprise on the man's face when he explained the situation shifted quickly to anger. "Crow's always been a snake," Jacob said, spitting into the dirt. "But going after a woman for doing honest work? That's low even for him." "I need people to know what's happening," Silas said. "Need them to understand that if he can drive us out, he can do it to anyone." "You're not wrong." Jacob wiped his hands on his pants. "I'll spread the word. And I'll talk to some of the other ranchers. Time someone stood up to that bastard." Silas got similar responses at every stop. The widow Patterson promised to bring food and supplies. The Hanson brothers offered to help with security. Samuel Cross, the man with the broken wagon axle, said he'd organize a meeting of all the local ranchers and farmers to discuss Crow's behavior. By the time Silas made it back to his own property, the sun was setting and he had something he hadn't expected: allies. Real ones, the kind who'd actually show up when things got bad. Rowan was waiting in the yard, and the relief on her face when she saw him was unmistakable. "Thought maybe you'd run into trouble," she said. "Nothing I couldn't handle." He dismounted, his body aching from a full day in the saddle. "Got commitments from about 15 families. They're going to help however they can." "That's good. We're going to need them." She gestured toward the forge. Had 3 customers today. 2 paid work. 1 was asking questions about our arrangement with Crow. What did you tell them? The truth. That we don't have an arrangement and we don't want one. She paused. Word's spreading fast. People are choosing sides. Which side are they choosing? Most? Ours. Crow's not as popular as he thinks he is. She smiled grimly. Turns out running roughshod over people for years makes you enemies. Who knew? They went inside, and Silas fixed the broken window with boards and nails, while Rowan made dinner from their dwindling supplies. They ate together at the scarred kitchen table, and for a little while it almost felt normal, like they were just 2 people building a life together, rather than 2 people under siege. What happens when he realizes intimidation isn't working? Rowan asked as they cleaned up. Then he'll try something else, something worse. That's what I figured. She dried her hands on a towel. So we need to be smarter than him, faster, more prepared. Any ideas? A few. She sat down, and in the lamplight she looked tired but determined. First, we need to make ourselves valuable to the community, not just as a forge, but as a hub. We start hosting gatherings, lending equipment, helping with projects. We make it so that losing us would hurt everyone, not just ourselves. That'll take time. We've got time now. The debt's paid. The ranch is secure legally. She leaned forward. Second, we document everything Crow does. Every threat, every intimidation, every suspicious incident. We build a case against him that's solid enough to take to the territorial marshal if we need to. Crow probably has the marshal in his pocket. Maybe, but documentation creates accountability. Even corrupt officials think twice when there's a paper trail. She pulled out a small notebook from her pocket. I already started. Dates, times, witnesses, everything. Silas looked at this woman who'd arrived on his dying ranch barely a week ago and transformed everything. You're scary when you're organized, you know that? I'm scary all the time. You're just now noticing. She smiled, and it was real this time. Third, we keep building the business. More customers, more work, more success. Every dollar we earn is another piece of armor against him. And fourth, we don't back down. No matter what he throws at us, we hold the line. Her eyes met his. Because if we run now, everything we've built means nothing, and I'm not starting over again. Not this time. Not this time, Silas echoed, and felt the words settle into something like a promise. They spent the next few days executing Rowan's plan. Word spread faster than Silas expected, and soon there was a steady stream of customers coming to the forge. Rowan worked from dawn to well past dark, and the money came in at a pace that would have seemed impossible just a week ago. People started lingering after their work was done, sharing news and gossip. The forge became what Rowan had predicted, a gathering place, a hub. And with every conversation, every connection, their roots in the community grew deeper. Crow made his displeasure known in small ways. Supplies Silas ordered mysteriously never arrived. 2 customers canceled orders without explanation. A fence got cut one night, and 3 cattle wandered off before Silas could find them. But nothing major, nothing that couldn't be fixed or worked around. He's testing us, Rowan said one evening as they tallied the week's earnings, seeing what we'll tolerate. Or he's planning something bigger and keeping us distracted with small problems. Could be both. She made a note in her ledger. Either way, we stay alert. The next morning, Samuel Cross showed up with a dozen other ranchers and farmers. They gathered in Silas's yard, a rough collection of frontier survivors who'd all faced down drought, winter, and desperation. We've been talking, Samuel said without preamble, about Crow, about what he's been doing, and we've decided enough is enough. What are you proposing? Silas asked. A collective. Samuel looked around at the others, got nods. We pool resources, share labor, back each other up. One of us gets threatened, we all respond. One of us needs help, we all provide it. We make it so Crow can't isolate any single target. That's a declaration of war, Silas said carefully, against the most powerful man in the territory. It's a declaration of independence, the widow Patterson corrected. We're not asking his permission to exist. We're telling him we don't need it. And you're all willing to risk that? We're already at risk, Jacob Marsh said. Crow's been circling all of us for years. You 2 just forced him to show his hand early. But he was always going to come for us eventually. Silas looked at Rowan. She was standing with her arms crossed, watching the assembled group with an expression he couldn't quite read. "What do you think?" he asked her. "I think these people are right," she said slowly, "and I think Crow's made a mistake. He thought we were isolated and weak. Instead, he's created something he can't control: community. So we do this? We do this." She turned to the group. "But everyone needs to understand what they're signing up for. This won't be easy. It won't be safe. Crow will push back, and he'll push hard." "We understand," Samuel said, and the others murmured agreement. "Then let's make it official." Rowan pulled out her notebook. "We document everything. We create a charter, and we make sure everyone knows that an attack on one is an attack on all." They spent the next hour hammering out details. Who would contribute what? How decisions would be made, what resources would be shared. It was messy and argumentative, and exactly what democracy looked like when it wasn't prettied up for textbooks. By the time they finished, they had something real, something that could actually work if they held together. The group dispersed with promises to spread the word, and Silas found himself alone in the yard with Rowan as the sun climbed toward noon. "Did we just start a revolution?" he asked. "We started something," she said. "Whether it's a revolution or just a really complicated way to get ourselves killed remains to be seen." "Optimistic. Realistic." She stretched, her back popping. "But I'll take organized resistance over slow defeat any day." That night, the resistance got its first test. Silas was in the house going over accounts when he heard shouting from the direction of the forge. He grabbed his rifle and ran, heart pounding. The forge was surrounded. 8 men on horseback, torches lit, circling the building like wolves around wounded prey. And standing in the doorway with a hammer in her hand was Rowan, facing them down alone. "Don't care who sent you," she was saying as Silas ran up. "This is private property, and you're trespassing." "Private property that's causing problems," one of the riders said. Silas recognized him. Tom Brennan, one of Crow's foremen. "Mr. Crow thinks maybe it'd be better if this forge had an accident, something that couldn't be fixed." "Touch this building and it'll be the last thing you do," Rowan said flatly. Brennan laughed. "You gonna stop all of us by yourself?" "No," Silas said, raising his rifle. "She's got help." 2 against 8? Brennan's smile widened. "Those aren't good odds." "Better than you think," said a new voice. Jacob Marsh rode into the firelight, his own rifle ready. Behind him came the Hanson brothers, then the widow Patterson, then Samuel Cross, and half a dozen others. Within minutes, the riders were surrounded by armed neighbors, all of them grim-faced and ready. "Anyone want to reconsider those odds?" Silas asked. Brennan's smile died. He looked around at the gathering force, at the determined faces, and something shifted in his expression. Not quite fear, but close enough. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes, it is," Rowan replied. "For tonight, anyway. Now get off our land before someone does something they can't take back." The riders left, torches guttering out as they retreated into the dark, and the neighbors stayed, forming a perimeter, keeping watch through the night. Silas stood in the yard and watched them, people who'd been strangers a week ago, now willing to risk themselves for something bigger than any individual property. "We did it," he said to Rowan. "We actually did it." "We survived another night," she corrected. "That's not the same as winning." "It's close enough for now." She looked at him, and in the mixed light of moon and forge fire, her face was softer than he'd seen it. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for backing me up, for believing this could work. Thank you for showing me it was worth trying." They stood there together while the neighbors kept watch, and the forge burned bright, a beacon in the winter dark that said some things were worth defending, no matter the cost. The collective changed everything, but not in the ways Silas expected. For one thing, it made the ranch unbearably busy. People came and went at all hours, bringing work for Rowan, sharing news, dropping off supplies, checking security. The quiet isolation he'd lived with for 2 years vanished overnight, replaced by something louder and messier and infinitely more complicated. He wasn't sure if he liked it, but he couldn't deny it was working. 3 weeks passed without another direct confrontation. Crow's men stayed away, though there were signs they were still watching. Horses spotted on distant ridges, strangers asking questions in town. A sense of pressure building, like weather before a storm. Rowan worked herself half to death during those weeks. She'd be at the forge before dawn and often didn't stop until well past midnight. Orders kept flooding in. Not just repair work anymore, but custom pieces, decorative iron, specialized tools. Her reputation spread across the territory faster than any advertisement could have managed. "You need to rest," Silas told her one evening, finding her still hammering away at some elaborate gate design a wealthy merchant had commissioned. "I'll rest when we're secure," she said without looking up. "We are secure. The debt's paid, the property's ours, and we've got a whole community backing us up." Financially secure, legally secure, physically secure? She finally paused, wiped sweat from her forehead. "Pick one, because we're not all three yet. Not even close. The money's coming in steady, ici, which means nothing if Crow finds a way to cut off our supplies or burn down the forge or convince the territorial government we're some kind of threat." She set down her hammer hard enough to ring. "I've seen what happens when you think you're safe. That's when everything falls apart." Silas recognized the tone, the edge of exhaustion meeting paranoia, creating something brittle that could snap if pushed too hard. He'd heard it in his own voice plenty of times over the past 2 years. "Come inside," he said. "Eat something. The gate can wait an hour." "It can't." "It can." He stepped between her and the anvil. "You're running yourself into the ground, and that helps no one. Not me, not the business, not yourself." She looked at him, and for a moment he thought she'd argue. Then something in her shoulders sagged, and she nodded. They walked to the house through snow that had started falling again, soft flakes that caught in Rowan's hair and melted on her heated skin. Inside, Silas reheated stew from earlier and watched her eat like someone who'd forgotten food was supposed to be enjoyed rather than just consumed. "When's the last time you slept a full night?" he asked. "I sleep enough." "That's not an answer." Rowan stared into her bowl. 5 days ago, maybe 6. "That's insane." "That's survival." She looked up at him. "Every piece I finish, every customer I satisfy, every dollar we earn, those are defenses against Crow, against failure, against ending up where I was before I came here. And I'm not going back to that. Not ever." "Where were you? Before the agency connected us, I mean." She was quiet for long enough that Silas thought she wouldn't answer. Then she set down her spoon and spoke to the table rather than to him. "Working in a hotel kitchen in Denver. Washing dishes, scrubbing floors, anything that kept a roof over my head. The pay was terrible, the work was worse, and every single day I'd walk past a blacksmith shop on my way home and feel like I was dying a little more." Her hands clenched. "I spent 3 years after Pa died trying to find forge work, and when I finally accepted it wasn't going to happen, I thought I'd just exist. Get through each day and try not to think about what I'd lost. What changed? I saw your advertisement in a newspaper someone left at the hotel, and I thought, maybe this is it. Maybe this desperate rancher at the edge of nowhere won't care that I'm a woman if I can help save his dying property." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Turns out I was right. You needed me too badly to have the luxury of prejudice." "It wasn't just need," Silas said quietly. "I was desperate, yeah, but I also knew I couldn't do it alone anymore. And when you showed up and I saw what you could do," he stopped, searching for words. "You saved this place. Not just the property, the whole thing. You gave it a reason to exist again." "We saved it," she corrected. "You went out and built those relationships, organized the collective, stood up to Crow's men. I just made things and hit them with hammers. You did a lot more than that." They looked at each other across the scarred kitchen table, and Silas felt something shift in the space between them. Something that had been building since she'd arrived, but neither of them had acknowledged, because acknowledging it meant making themselves vulnerable in a different way than fighting cattle barons or foreclosure notices. Rowan broke eye contact first, stood up quickly. "I should get back to work." "You should sleep." "I told you I can't." "Then sleep out here." Silas gestured toward the sitting room, where the stove kept things warmer than the bedrooms upstairs. "I'll keep watch. Make sure nothing happens. Just get a few hours. Please." She hesitated, and he could see her weighing options, calculating risks. Finally, she nodded. 2 hours. Then you wake me. 4 hours minimum. 3, and that's not negotiable. Deal. She settled onto the worn couch near the stove, and within minutes her breathing had evened out into sleep. Silas watched her for a moment. This fierce woman who'd appeared in his life like an answer to a prayer he hadn't known how to ask, then grabbed his rifle and took up position by the window. The night was quiet except for wind and the occasional crack of ice breaking on the barn roof. Silas let his mind wander, thinking about everything that had changed in less than a month. Thinking about Barrett Crow and what his next move might be. Thinking about the future, which was starting to look like something more than just surviving until spring. He was so lost in thought that he almost missed the movement at the edge of the property. A shadow that didn't belong, too deliberate to be wind or wildlife. Silas's hand tightened on the rifle. He watched, barely breathing, as the shadow resolved into a person moving carefully through the dark. Then another. Then 3 more. 5 figures approaching the forge from different directions. He was at Rowan's side in seconds, hand over her mouth to keep her from making noise as she woke. Her eyes snapped open, instantly alert, no grogginess. When she saw his expression, she nodded and he removed his hand. "Company," he whispered. 5 of them, headed for the forge. She was up and moving before he finished speaking, grabbing her knife and a heavy iron poker from beside the stove. They slipped out the back door into the freezing night, circling around to approach the forge from the blind side. The 5 figures had regrouped near the forge entrance. Silas recognized one of them from the night Brennan had brought riders, a younger man with a nervous energy that suggested this wasn't his idea. The others were strangers, but they all had the look of hired muscle. People who got paid to do things honest men wouldn't. They were carrying something, torches, and Silas's blood went cold when he realized what else. Kerosene cans. They were going to burn it down. Rowan saw it the same moment he did. She grabbed his arm, her grip tight enough to hurt, and when he looked at her face in the moonlight, he saw fury that could have melted iron. "We can't take 5 armed men by ourselves," Silas whispered. "We need to get help. There's no time. By the time help arrives, the forge is ash." Her jaw set. "We stop them now." "How?" "You're about to find out." She moved before he could stop her, stepping into the open near the forge, with the poker raised. "Evening, gentlemen. Lost?" The 5 men spun, clearly not expecting to be caught. The nervous one actually dropped his torch, which sputtered out in the snow. "This doesn't concern you, lady," one of the older men said. He had a scarred face and dead eyes. "Walk away, and you don't get hurt. This is my forge you're planning to destroy. That very much concerns me." Rowan took another step forward. "Drop the cans and leave, and I won't have to hurt you." Scarface laughed. "You and what army?" "Don't need an army." She shifted her grip on the poker. "Just need to be willing to do things you're not." "She's stalling," another man said. "Let's just do it." He reached for something at his belt, and Rowan moved. The poker swung in a tight arc, catching him in the ribs hard enough that Silas heard something crack even from 20 feet away. The man went down screaming, and chaos erupted. Silas ran forward, rifle up, but everything was happening too fast. One of the men grabbed Rowan from behind, while another went for his gun. Silas fired a shot into the air, meant as a warning, also meant to alert the neighbors who'd been taking turns on watch patrol. The gunshot changed everything. The man who'd grabbed Rowan released her when she drove her elbow into his gut, and suddenly everyone was running in different directions. 2 of them grabbed their injured friend and hauled him away. The nervous young man stood frozen for a second, torn between orders and survival instinct, before dropping his kerosene can and sprinting after the others. Only Scarface held his ground, his hand on his pistol now, eyes calculating. "This was a mistake," Rowan said, breathing hard. "Tell Crow it was a mistake." "The only mistake," Scarface said slowly, "is thinking you can win this fight." He drew the pistol, and Silas's heart stopped. The gunshot was deafening in the winter quiet, but it didn't come from Scarface's weapon. The man crumpled sideways, clutching his shoulder, and Silas spun to see Jacob Marsh standing at the edge of the property with a smoking rifle. "Nobody burns down a forge on my watch," Jacob said calmly, like he'd just commented on the weather. More neighbors appeared from the dark, the Hanson brothers, Samuel Cross, others who'd been on patrol. They surrounded Scarface, who was bleeding and cursing and clearly reconsidering his life choices. "Get him out of here," Samuel said, "and tell Crow that's his last warning. Next time someone comes onto this property with bad intentions, we won't aim for shoulders." They hauled Scarface away, leaving behind dropped torches and kerosene cans as evidence of what had almost happened. Silas stood in the trampled snow and tried to process how close they'd come to losing everything again. Rowan walked over to the kerosene cans, picked one up, turned it over in her hands. Her expression was blank, closed off in a way that made Silas nervous. They were really going to do it, she said flatly, burn years of work to ash because one man can't handle competition. But they didn't. Silas moved closer. Because we stopped them, and because we have people watching our backs. This time, she set down the can. But Crow's escalating. Intimidation didn't work, so he went straight to destruction. What's next? What does he try when fire fails? I don't know. Neither do I. And that terrifies me. She looked at him, and there was something raw in her expression now. I built this. From nothing, from scraps, from work I had to fight for every single day. And he almost took it away like it was nothing. But he didn't. Because we got lucky, her voice cracked. Because Jacob happened to be close enough to hear the gunshot. Because those men were incompetent enough to get caught. But what about next time? What if they come when we're not here? What if they bring more people? What if... She stopped, her breathing ragged, and Silas realized she was shaking. Not from cold, but from the adrenaline crash hitting her all at once. Come here, he said quietly, and when she didn't move, he closed the distance and pulled her against his chest. She was stiff for a moment, then something broke and she grabbed fistfuls of his coat, like it was the only thing keeping her upright. They stood there at the wreckage of someone else's violence, while the neighbors discreetly moved away to give them space. Silas felt her heart hammering against his ribs, felt the tremors running through her body, and understood that this fierce woman who'd faced down armed men with nothing but a poker was also someone who'd been running scared for so long that stopping felt impossible. We're going to get through this, he said into her hair. I don't know how, and I don't know what it'll cost, but we will. You can't promise that. I just did. She pulled back enough to look at him, her eyes wet but angry. Promises don't mean anything against men with money and guns. They mean everything when you've got people who'll stand with you. He gestured toward where the neighbors had been. That's real, Rowan. That's not luck or hope or wishful thinking. That's community. And it's stronger than Crow thinks. She studied his face like she was trying to decide whether to believe him. Then she nodded once, stepped back, and wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I need to check the forge. Make sure they didn't damage anything before we interrupted them. I'll help. They spent the next hour going over every inch of the building, checking for sabotage or weak points. Everything was intact, but the close call had left them both on edge. By the time they finished, dawn was breaking and more neighbors had arrived, drawn by news of the attack. They gathered in the yard, a rough council of frontier survivors trying to figure out their next move. We need to take this to the authorities, the widow Patterson said. The territorial marshal needs to know Crow's trying to destroy property. The marshal's 3 days' ride from here and probably in Crow's pocket anyway, Samuel countered. By the time we get official help, who knows what else he'll try. So what do we do? Wait for him to come back with more men? We go on offense, Jacob said, and everyone turned to look at him. We've been reacting this whole time, letting Crow dictate the terms. Time to change that. What are you suggesting? Silas asked carefully. I'm suggesting we make it unprofitable for him to keep targeting you. Jacob leaned forward. Crow's got business interests all over the territory. Cattle operations, supply contracts, lending operations. We start taking our business elsewhere, convince others to do the same, and we hurt him where he actually cares, his wallet. That's economic warfare, Samuel said. Could take months to have any real effect. You have a better idea? No one did. They argued for another hour, throwing out suggestions that ranged from reasonable to desperate to borderline suicidal. Finally, Silas stood up and the group quieted. We do both, he said. We organize the economic pressure Jacob mentioned, and we document everything for the authorities. And in the meantime, we make it clear that this property is defended, not just by us, but by everyone here. That's asking a lot, one of the Hanson brothers said. Asking people to risk their own places to protect yours. It's not just ours anymore, Rowan said, speaking up for the first time since the meeting started. Crow came after us because we were successful, because we proved you don't need his permission or his backing to build something. If he wins here, every one of you is next. She looked around the group. So yeah, it's asking a lot, but it's also asking you to defend your own future. The silence that followed was heavy with calculation. Then Jacob stood. I'm in, whatever you need. Me too, said the widow Patterson. One by one, the others committed. Not everyone, a few people left quietly, unwilling or unable to take the risk. But most stayed, and by the time the sun was fully up, they had the skeleton of a real plan. The next 2 weeks were a blur of activity. Rowan worked on fulfilling orders while Silas coordinated with the collective, organizing supply routes that bypassed Crow's operations, finding alternative vendors, building networks that didn't depend on the cattle baron's infrastructure. It was working, slowly, painfully, but working. Crow's prices started dropping as customers disappeared. His foremen started showing up at collective members' properties with better offers, lower rates, attempting to win back business through economics instead of intimidation. The attempted arson had backfired spectacularly, galvanizing the community instead of scaring it. And that, Silas realized, was the problem. "He's too quiet," he said to Rowan one evening as they reviewed accounts. "After we disrupted his men, I expected immediate retaliation. Instead, nothing. Maybe he's accepted defeat." "Barrett Crow doesn't accept defeat. He redefines victory and tries again." Silas tapped the ledger. "The quiet makes me nervous, feels like planning. Or maybe we actually won." Rowan stretched, her back popping. "Maybe the collective worked exactly how we hoped, and he's realized we're not worth the trouble." "You believe that?" "No," she admitted, "but I want to." The truth came crashing down 3 days later when Samuel Cross showed up at the ranch looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. "They took my daughter," he said without preamble, his voice hollow. "Rebecca. She was in town yesterday, shopping with friends. Never came home. Her friends say 3 men grabbed her, threw her in a wagon, and drove off." Silas felt ice form in his stomach. "Did anyone see which direction?" "North, toward Crow's main property." Samuel's hands were shaking. "They left a note at my place this morning. Said if I want her back unharmed, I withdraw from the collective and convince 5 other families to do the same." "That son of a bitch," Rowan said, her voice tight with fury. "He took a child." "She's 19, Samuel said, like the distinction mattered. "But yeah, he took my daughter to force my hand." He looked at Silas with desperate eyes. "What do I do? If I don't comply, if something happens to her—" "Nothing's going to happen to her," Silas said with more confidence than he felt. "We're going to get her back." "How? You want me to ride onto Crow's property and demand he release her? He'll kill us all." "Then we don't demand," Rowan said. "We trade." Everyone turned to look at her. "Trade what?" Samuel asked. "Me." Rowan's expression was calm, decided. "Crow wants us to fail, wants the collective to fall apart. The forge is the center of it all. Without it, the economic pressure disappears. So I offer myself up. I work for him and the competition, and Rebecca goes free." "Absolutely not," Silas said immediately. "That's not happening. It's the only thing that makes sense. It makes no sense. You think he'll honor that deal? The second you're under his control, he'll work you to death or worse, and Rebecca probably still doesn't get released." Silas grabbed her shoulders. "There has to be another way." "Then tell me what it is, because I'm not seeing it." They stared at each other while Samuel watched with the desperate hope of a drowning man spotting driftwood. "We go to the marshal," Silas said, finally. "This is kidnapping. That's federal. Serious. Even if the marshal's corrupt, there are lines—" "There aren't lines for men like Crow," Rowan interrupted. "Just suggestions they ignore when convenient. By the time the marshal investigates, if he investigates, Rebecca could be dead or worse." "So what do you want to do? Trade yourself for her and pray Crow suddenly develops a conscience?" "I want to save a girl whose only crime was having a father who stood by us." Rowan's voice broke slightly. "This is my fault. I pushed for the collective. I made us a target." "We made us a target," Silas corrected. "Together. And we're going to fix this together." "How?" Before he could answer, Jacob Marsh burst into the house without knocking, his face flushed with urgency. "Silas, Rowan, you need to hear this. Tom Brennan's at my place asking to talk. Says he has information about the Cross girl." Brennan, Crow's foreman, the man who'd led the torch-wielding mob. "Could be a trap," Rowan said. "Could be," Jacob agreed. "But he came alone, unarmed, and he looks scared. Whatever he wants to say, he thinks it's worth the risk." They rode to Jacob's place with Samuel, all of them armed and tense. Brennan was waiting in the barn, and Jacob was right. The man looked terrified. His clothes were disheveled, his face bruised, and his hand shook as he accepted a cup of coffee. "Talk," Silas said without preamble. "Where's Rebecca Cross?" "At the main ranch, locked in one of the storage buildings." Brennan wouldn't meet their eyes. "3 men guarding her. Crow's planning to move her tomorrow, take her somewhere more remote where she can't be found if things go wrong." "Why are you telling us this?" Samuel demanded, his voice raw. Brennan finally looked up. "Because I have a daughter too, same age as yours. And when Crow gave the order to take her, when I saw what we were doing..." He stopped, swallowed hard. "I signed up to muscle some business competition, maybe rough up some people who needed persuading. I didn't sign up for kidnapping children." "You helped create this situation," Rowan said coldly. "You don't get credit for developing a conscience now." "I'm not asking for credit. I'm offering information and a way in." Brennan pulled a folded paper from his coat. "This is a map of the ranch. Guard positions, timing of patrols, where they're keeping the girl. You want her back? This is how you do it." Silas took the map, studied it. It showed a sprawling complex with multiple buildings, corrals, and at least a dozen marked guard positions. "This is suicide," he said. "Even with this map, we'd be outnumbered 5-1. Not if you time it right. Tomorrow night, most of the hands will be in town for the monthly supply run. Crow keeps a skeleton crew on the property during those runs. Your odds are better then." "And what do you get out of this?" Rowan asked. "Why betray your employer?" "Because I'm leaving. Taking my family and getting out of the territory before Crow realizes what I've done." Brennan stood. "And because maybe this is the only decent thing I can do to balance out all the indecent things I've already done." He left before anyone could respond, disappearing into the winter afternoon like a ghost fleeing judgment. Samuel grabbed the map. "This could work. We get a group together, hit them tomorrow night." "Or it's a trap and we ride into an ambush," Jacob said. "We can't trust Brennan." "We don't have to trust him," Silas said slowly, an idea forming. "We just have to be smart about it. We scout the location first, confirm Rebecca's there, and the map is accurate. Then we plan the extraction for when we know the situation on the ground." "That's still a dozen ways for it to go wrong," Rowan pointed out. "Yeah, but doing nothing is a guaranteed wrong outcome." He looked at Samuel. "It's your daughter, your call." Samuel's face was a battlefield of fear and determination. Finally, he nodded. "We do it. But I'm coming along. No one extracts my girl without me." "Fair enough." Silas turned to Jacob. "How many people can we get together by tomorrow night? People who can handle themselves in a fight." "Maybe 15, 20 if we're lucky." "Get them. Tell them to be ready to ride at sunset tomorrow." He looked at the map again, committing details to memory. "And tell them this is volunteer only. Anyone who comes needs to understand the risks." They spent the rest of the day preparing. Silas rode out to scout Crow's property from a distance, confirming what he could of Brennan's map. It seemed accurate, which was either good news or evidence of a very sophisticated trap. Rowan stayed at the ranch, finishing orders with fierce concentration, like she was trying to leave everything in order, just in case. They didn't talk about the possibility of failure, of what might happen if the rescue went wrong. Some conversations were better left unspoken. That night, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, Silas heard soft footsteps outside his door. Then a quiet knock. "It's open," he called. Rowan came in, wrapped in a blanket against the cold. She didn't say anything, just sat on the edge of his bed in the dark. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Keep thinking about all the ways tomorrow goes wrong." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Keep seeing that girl dying because we weren't fast enough, or smart enough, or brave enough. We'll be all three. We have to be. We have to. That's not how the world works. Being those things doesn't guarantee anything, except you tried." She turned to look at him, her face barely visible in the moonlight through the window. "I've lost enough already, Silas. I can't lose this too. Can't lose you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning they'd both been avoiding. "You won't," he said, sitting up. "We're going to get Rebecca back, and we're going to come home, and this is all going to work out. You don't know that." "No, but I believe it anyway." He reached out, found her hand in the dark. "And I believe you and I are going to build something that lasts. Not just a ranch or a forge, but something real, something that matters." She squeezed his hand. "I want to believe that too." "Then do." at least for tonight. They sat there in this quiet dark, holding hands like it was the only anchor keeping them from drifting apart, until Rowan finally stood and headed back to her own room. And Silas lay awake until dawn, running through plans and possibilities and prayers to a universe that had never seemed particularly interested in listening. When sunset came the next day, 23 riders gathered at the ranch. Some Silas knew well, others were faces from the collective he'd seen only in passing. All of them looked grim and determined and scared in the way people get when they're about to do something dangerous for the right reasons. "You all know why we're here," Silas said, addressing the group. "A member of our community had his daughter taken by a man who thinks money and power put him above consequences. Tonight, we prove him wrong." He spread out Brennan's map, walking everyone through the plan. Fast entry, locate Rebecca, extract her before anyone could organize a proper response. Get in, get out, don't engage unless absolutely necessary. "What if it is a trap?" someone asked. "Then we adapt and survive," Rowan answered. "But we don't leave without that girl." They rode out as stars were appearing, a column of frontier justice moving through the winter dark. The journey to Crow's Ranch took 3 hours, every minute stretching like taffy. And when they finally saw lights in the distance, Silas raised a hand to halt the group. "Everyone remember their assignments," he said quietly. "Stay quiet, stay together, and nobody does anything stupid." They approached on foot, leaving horses with 3 riders who'd stay back as a rear guard. The ranch was exactly as Brennan's map showed. Sprawling, well-maintained, wealthy in a way that came from taking rather than building. Guard positions matched the map. Patrol timing matched the map. Everything Brennan had told them appeared accurate, which made Silas more nervous rather than less. They split into 3 groups. Samuel, Silas, and Rowan would locate and extract Rebecca. Jacob would lead a second group to create a distraction, if needed. The third group would secure their exit route and signal if guards approached. Everything depended on speed and luck, neither of which were reliable commodities. The storage building was isolated at the back of the property, away from the main structures. 2 guards stood outside, both looking bored and cold. Silas signaled to Jacob's group, and seconds later gunshots rang out from the front of the property. The guards' heads snapped toward the sound, and they took off running to investigate. The moment they were out of sight, Silas, Rowan, and Samuel sprinted for the building. The door was locked. Rowan pulled out a set of tools Silas hadn't known she carried and had it open in under 30 seconds. Inside was dark, cold, and smelled like dirt and fear. "Rebecca?" Samuel called softly. A shuffling sound from the back corner, then a voice, young and terrified. "Dad?" They found her bound to a support post, gagged, but alive and seemingly unharmed. Samuel nearly collapsed in relief as he cut her free and pulled her into his arms. "We have to move," Rowan said urgently. "That distraction won't last." Footsteps outside. Lots of them, running. Silas's stomach dropped. They'd been too slow, or the guards had figured it out faster than expected, or... The door slammed open and Barrett Crow walked in with 8 armed men behind him, all of them with guns raised and expressions that said they'd been waiting for exactly this. "Well now," Crow said, smiling that terrible smile. "Isn't this convenient? Came to raid my property, did you? Break into my buildings, attempt to steal what's mine?" "That girl isn't yours," Silas said, positioning himself between Crow's men and the others. "She is as long as she's on my property, and now you are too." Crow's smile widened. Trespassing, breaking and entering, attempted theft. That's serious crimes, Granger, the kind that get people hanged. It had been a trap after all. Brennan had fed them real information to make it believable, but Crow had known they were coming, had let them walk right into his hands. "Let them go," Silas said. "This is between you and me." "Oh, it stopped being between us the moment you convinced my workers to desert, my customers to abandon me, and my reputation to suffer." Crow gestured with his pistol. "Drop your weapons. All of you. Unless you want this to get very messy very quickly." Silas looked at Rowan, saw his own calculations reflected in her eyes. They were outnumbered, outgunned, caught in a building with 1 exit. Fighting would get them killed. Slowly, they set down their weapons. Crow's men moved in to secure them, rough hands binding wrists with rope that bit into skin. "What now?" Rowan asked, her voice steady despite everything. "You gonna kill us?" That'll bring the marshal down, even if he is in your pocket. Kill you? No, nothing so crude. Crow walked around them like a buyer examining livestock. I'm going to do something much smarter. I'm going to make sure every one of you understands what happens when people challenge me, and then I'm going to let you go, broken and humiliated, as an example to anyone else who gets similar ideas. He nodded to his men, and the beating started. Pain had a way of making time meaningless. Silas couldn't tell if seconds or hours passed as Crow's men worked them over with fists and boots. He heard Rebecca screaming, heard Samuel's roar of fury cut short by a blow that sounded like breaking wood, heard Rowan's sharp intake of breath but never a cry, never a plea. He tried to protect his head, his ribs, anything vital, tried and mostly failed. The world narrowed to impact and aftermath, the space between hits where his body remembered how to hurt. Then it stopped. Silas lay on the dirt floor, tasting blood, trying to inventory what was broken and what just felt that way. Somewhere nearby, Rowan was coughing, a wet sound that worried him more than his own injuries. That's enough. Crow's voice came from somewhere above. I want them conscious for what comes next. Rough hands hauled Silas upright. His vision swam, doubled, slowly resolved into Crow's satisfied face. Here's how this works, Crow said, speaking to all of them but looking at Silas. You're going to sign papers transferring your property to me, all of you. Whatever land you own, whatever businesses you operate, all of it becomes mine. Fair market value, of course. I'm not a thief. Go to hell, Rowan spat, blood on her lips. Crow backhanded her casually, the kind of violence that came from practice. You'll sign, or I'll make sure everyone you care about suffers. Starting with the cross girl. Pretty thing like her, awful things can happen. You understand what I'm saying? Samuel lunged forward despite his bound hands, got clubbed down for his trouble. Rebecca was sobbing now, and the sound of it was worse than the beating had been. Sign or watch her suffer, Crow repeated. Your choice. Silas tried to think through the pain and rage fogging his brain. They sign, Crow gets everything and probably kills them anyway to tie up loose ends. They don't sign, he hurts Rebecca, and they either break or die resisting. No good options, just degrees of bad. How do we know you'll let her go if we sign? Silas asked, buying time he wasn't sure existed. You don't. But you know what happens if you don't sign. Crow pulled out a folded document, set it on a crate. I'll even let you start. Set an example for the others. One of Crow's men cut the rope binding Silas's hands, shoved a pen at him. The document was official-looking, dense with legal language that basically said he'd transfer the ranch to Crow for a pittance, his father's land, his mother's grave, the forge Rowan had brought back to life, all of it gone with a signature. Silas looked at Rowan. She was watching him with eyes that said she understood, that she wouldn't blame him, that survival mattered more than pride or property or any of it. He picked up the pen. Then he drove it into the throat of the guard standing closest to him. Everything exploded into chaos. The guard went down choking, blood spraying, and Silas grabbed his pistol before anyone else could react. He fired twice, one shot taking out the lantern, plunging the building into near darkness, the second hitting another guard in the leg. Run! He shouted and prayed the others understood. Rowan moved despite her injuries, slamming her bound hands into the face of her nearest guard and grabbing his knife. She cut Samuel's bonds with 3 quick slashes, and Samuel grabbed Rebecca and dove for the back wall of the building. Gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes painting the dark in violent snapshots. Silas fired back blindly, just trying to create enough confusion for the others to escape. Something burned across his shoulder, a bullet grazing him, but he kept moving, kept firing until the hammer clicked on empty. He threw the useless gun at someone's head and ran for where he'd last seen the others. Found a gap in the back wall where old boards had rotted through, squeezed through into the freezing night, and heard pursuit immediate behind him. Go for the horses! That was Jacob's voice somewhere in the dark. The distraction group must have heard the shots and moved in. More gunfire, this time from multiple directions. Crow's men were shouting, trying to organize, but the darkness and confusion had turned everything into a nightmare of shadows and muzzle flashes. Silas found Rowan by nearly running into her. She grabbed his arm and they stumbled together toward where they'd left the horses. Samuel and Rebecca were ahead of them, shapes in the dark. Behind them, Crow's voice was shouting orders that kept getting interrupted by more gunshots. They reached the horses, and the chaos of mounting while wounded and exhausted nearly killed them as surely as bullets would have. Someone grabbed Silas from behind, and he smashed his elbow back, felt it connect with something that crunched. The grip released, and he hauled himself onto Bess, grabbed Rowan's arm, and pulled her up behind him. "Ride!" Jacob shouted, and they rode, the entire group scattering into the night like leaves in a storm. Pursuit followed, but half-hearted. Crow's men weren't getting paid enough to chase armed, desperate people through dark countryside. By the time they'd put 5 miles between themselves and the ranch, the only sounds were hoofbeats and labored breathing. They regrouped at a stream crossing, everyone taking inventory of injuries and losses. Samuel held Rebecca like she might disappear if he loosened his grip. She was shaking, but alive, and that was something. Jacob had taken a bullet through his side that needed immediate attention. 3 others were wounded but mobile, and Tom Hansen, who'd ridden in Jacob's group, was missing entirely. "We have to go back for him," someone said. "We can't." Jacob's voice was tight with pain. He knew the risks. We all did. Right now, we need to get somewhere safe and tend these wounds before anyone dies of them. They rode for the ranch, the only place that felt even remotely secure. Dawn was breaking by the time they arrived, painting the snow in shades of pink that felt obscene given what they'd just been through. The widow Patterson appeared from the house. She'd stayed behind to watch the property, and her face went pale when she saw their condition. Within minutes, she was organizing medical care with the efficiency of someone who'd dealt with frontier violence before. Silas let her work on him in a fog of exhaustion and shock. The burn across his shoulder was shallow, more spectacular than serious. His ribs were probably cracked but not broken. Everything else was bruises and abrasions that would heal if infection didn't set in. Rowan was in worse shape. She'd taken more punishment during the beating, and there was something wrong with her breathing that worried the widow. Possible cracked ribs of her own, maybe worse. She refused to stay down, though, kept trying to get up until Silas physically held her in place. "Stop," he said firmly. "You're hurt. Let yourself be hurt. We don't have time? We have exactly as much time as we take." He kept his hands on her shoulders, gentle but immovable. Crow won. We tried to be clever, and he was cleverer. Now we need to figure out what comes next, and we can't do that if you're dead from internal bleeding. Something in her expression cracked. I was so sure we could save her and get out clean, that we were smarter than him. We saved her. Rebecca's alive. That's not nothing. It's not enough. Her voice broke. He's going to come for us now. You know that, right? We attacked his property, killed his men. He can't let that stand. I know. And we lost. Decisively. Everyone saw it. She looked around at the wounded, the exhausted. How do we come back from this? Silas didn't have an answer. He was too tired, too hurt, too aware of how close they'd all come to dying for nothing. The widow finished bandaging Rowan and moved on to the next patient, and Silas found a chair and sat before his legs could give out. They'd survived. Barely. But survival without victory was just delayed defeat, and they all knew it. The collective started arriving around midday. Neighbors who'd heard about the disaster at Crow's Ranch and come to see the aftermath. Their faces told the story before words could. This was what happened when you challenged power. This was the price of resistance. Some wanted to keep fighting. Others talked about cutting losses, making peace, surviving to fight another day. A few just left, unwilling to be part of what came next. By evening, the group had shrunk from 23 to 14, not quite half. Enough to feel like betrayal even though Silas understood the logic. We can't win this, Samuel said quietly, sitting with Silas in the growing dark. Rebecca was asleep inside, sedated with laudanum the widow had provided. Not against someone with Crow's resources. Probably not, Silas agreed. So what do we do? I don't know. It was the most honest answer he had. Part of me says we should run. Take what we can carry and disappear before he comes to finish this. But that means he wins. Means everything we built was for nothing. Samuel rubbed his face. I keep thinking about Tom Hansen, about how he rode out tonight to help save my daughter, and now he's probably dead. How do I honor that by running? How do you honor it by dying? Samuel didn't have an answer for that. They sat in silence while the stars came out, cold and distant and uncaring about human struggles. Rowan found Silas later, moving like every step hurt, but refusing to show it. We need to talk. They walked to the forge, where she'd kept the fire banked low. The heat felt good after the cold, and the familiar smell of metal and coal was oddly comforting. I'm leaving, she said without preamble. Silas felt something drop in his chest. What? I'm the problem, Silas. Crow's targeting you because of me, because of the forge, because of the competition. If I take the fight somewhere else, maybe he leaves you alone. That's insane. You're not the problem. I'm exactly the problem. She picked up a hammer, set it back down. I came here and disrupted everything, built something that threatened his control. And now people are getting hurt because of it. Tom Hansen might be dead because of it. Tom Hansen made his own choices. We all did. Built on my ambition, my refusal to accept that some fights aren't worth fighting. She turned to face him. I've been running from failure for 3 years. Maybe it's time I stopped running and accepted that some things can't be fixed. So you're just going to give up? Let Crow win? I'm going to keep you from losing everything because of me. Her eyes were wet now. You still have the ranch if I'm gone. You can rebuild the cattle operation, stay small, stay beneath Crow's notice. But if I stay, he'll destroy you just to get to me. Silas crossed the space between them, grabbed her by the shoulders, made her look at him. Listen to me. We're past the point where leaving solves anything. Crow's not going to forget what happened tonight. I stabbed one of his men and shot another. Samuel's daughter is free. We humiliated him in front of his people. Your leaving doesn't erase that. Then what do? We fight smarter. Not with raids and rescues. That's his game. We fight with the only weapon we have that he can't match. What weapon? Community. Truth. The fact that everyone who's ever dealt with Crow has a story about how he crushed them or cheated them or threatened them. Silas felt an idea forming, crystallizing out of desperation. We don't fight him directly. We expose him. Document everything. Take it to newspapers in the big cities. Make it impossible for the territorial government to ignore. We turn him into a liability instead of an asset. That takes time we don't have. So we buy time. We make ourselves too valuable to attack, too connected to isolate. We turn this ranch into something that matters to everyone in the territory, not just us. Rowan studied his face like she was trying to read something written in a language she didn't quite understand. You really believe that could work? I believe it's the only chance we have. He loosened his grip on her shoulders, let his hands slide down her arms. And I believe we can do it together, but only together. You run, I lose the one person who's made me think surviving might actually be worth something. She looked away, but not before he saw the tears. I don't know how to do this. How to stay when everything's falling apart. Neither do I, but we figure it out. He touched her face, turned it back toward him. Together. That's the deal, remember? We build something together or we don't build anything at all. For a long moment she didn't respond. Then she nodded once, sharp. Together. But if this goes wrong, if people keep getting hurt, then we adapt. But we don't quit. He pulled her close, felt her finally let herself lean against him. We've come too far to quit now. They stood there in the warmth of the forge, while outside the temperature dropped, and the collective wrestled with doubt. And when they finally separated, there was something different in the air between them. Not quite hope, but something adjacent to it. Determination, maybe. Or just stubbornness too deep to drown. The next morning, Silas called a meeting of everyone who'd stayed. 14 people, wounded and exhausted, gathered in his house while he laid out the plan. We're not raiding anyone else's property, he started. We're not fighting Crow on his terms anymore. Instead, we're going to do something he can't defend against. We're going to tell the truth. He explained the idea that had formed in the forge, documenting Crow's abuses, collecting testimonies from everyone he'd wronged, building a case so comprehensive that newspapers and territorial officials couldn't ignore it. Making Crow's behavior a scandal instead of just local trouble. That's assuming anyone cares, Jacob said from where he sat with bandages wrapped around his midsection. Rich men get away with things all the time. Why would this be different? Because we make it different. We don't just send letters. We make it a story. We get it in the big papers, the ones that Eastern investors read. The kind of people Crow needs to keep doing business. Silas pointed to Rowan. And while we're building that case, we keep the forge running. Keep being successful. Keep showing that we're not just victims, we're viable. And if Crow attacks again before we can get the story out, the widow Patterson asked, Then we defend ourselves, and we make sure every attack is documented, every threat recorded, every piece of violence turned into evidence. Rowan stood, wincing at the movement. He wants to crush us quietly. We make it loud. We make it so loud he can't afford to continue. The debate went on for hours. Some people bought in immediately, energized by having a plan that didn't involve more violence. Others were skeptical but willing to try. A few left, convinced they were watching people commit slow suicide by bureaucracy. But enough stayed. Enough committed. And by afternoon they had assignments and a timeline and something that felt almost like purpose. Over the next week, the ranch transformed into something between a newspaper office and a legal archive. People came with stories about Crow. Loans that became traps, property seized through suspicious legal maneuvers, threats made and carried out, violence deployed casually. Rowan documented everything in her careful handwriting, creating a ledger of abuses that grew thicker by the day. Silas reached out to newspapers, to reformist politicians, to anyone who might care about frontier corruption. Most ignored him. A few sent polite refusals. But one, a reporter from a San Francisco paper who'd been investigating territorial land fraud, responded with interest. His name was Marcus Webb, and he arrived 10 days after Silas's first letter with a notebook and a skeptical expression that softened as he heard the testimonies and saw the documentation. "This is good," Webb said, flipping through Rowan's ledger. "Better than good. This is prosecutable if we can get it in front of the right people." "How long will that take?" Silas asked. "Months? Maybe a year. Territorial justice moves slow, and Crow's got connections." Webb looked up. "But if you can hold out, if you can keep building evidence and stay alive long enough for this to go public, you've got a real chance." "And in the meantime?" "In the meantime, I publish pieces about the situation, start building public pressure, make it harder for officials to look the other way." Webb tucked the ledger under his arm. "I'll need to take this with me, make copies, but I'll get it back to you within the month." After Webb left, Silas felt the fragile hope that had been building solidify into something more real. They had a path forward. It was long and uncertain and depended on systems that were designed to favor men like Crow, but it was something. Rowan kept the forge running at a pace that bordered on suicidal. Orders kept coming in despite, or maybe because of, the conflict with Crow. People wanted to support them, wanted to be part of something that felt like resistance. Every finished piece, every satisfied customer, every dollar earned became both income and statement. The collective adapted too, finding ways to support each other that didn't depend on Crow's infrastructure. Equipment sharing, labor exchanges, supply networks that bypassed his warehouses and lending operations. It was inefficient and awkward, but it worked well enough to keep farms and ranches operational. Crow stayed quiet. Too quiet. His men were seen watching from a distance, but never approaching. No more direct attacks, no more threats. Just observation and the pressure of waiting for the next move. "He's planning something," Rowan said one evening, working on a custom gate that had become increasingly elaborate as she channeled stress into metalwork. "Something bigger than raids or intimidation." "I know." Silas was reviewing accounts, trying to figure out if they could afford to hire another hand for spring planting. "Question is what and when." "My guess? He's waiting for us to relax, to think we've won." She adjusted a piece of ironwork, examined it critically. "Then he hits us when our guard's down. So we don't let our guard down." "For how long? Months? Years? Eventually we have to sleep, Silas. Eventually something's going to slip." He didn't have a counter-argument because she was right. They were in a war of attrition now, and Crow had deeper resources, more patience, and the advantage of only needing to win once while they had to win every single time. But they had something he didn't. They had people who showed up day after day not because they were paid, but because they believed it mattered. They had a community that had learned to function without his permission, and they had documentation that grew more damning every week. It had to be enough. It had to be, because the alternative was unthinkable. The answer to what Crow was planning came 5 weeks after the failed rescue, delivered by a stranger who rode up to the ranch at dawn with official papers and an apologetic expression. "Silas Granger?" the man asked. "That's me. I'm James Fairfield, Territorial Land Assessor. I'm here to inform you that your property title is under review for irregularities dating back to the original claim. You'll need to appear before the Territorial Court in Helena next month with documentation proving clear ownership, or the property will be seized and put up for public auction. Silas felt the ground drop out from under him. That's not possible. My father filed proper claim 30 years ago. Everything's been legal since. Perhaps. Fairfield handed over the papers. But Barrett Crowe has filed a challenge claiming the original survey was inaccurate and the property boundaries overlap with his own holdings. The court needs to review the evidence and make a determination. This is horseshit, Rowan said, appearing at Silas's shoulder. Crowe's manufacturing a legal challenge because he can't beat us any other way. That's not for me to determine, ma'am. I'm just here to deliver notice. Fairfield tipped his hat. Good luck in court. He rode off, and Silas stood there holding papers that might as well have been a death sentence. Fighting Crowe in court meant hiring lawyers they couldn't afford, traveling to Helena during spring planting, and battling legal expertise that would run circles around a simple rancher. He's going to take it anyway, Silas said quietly. All of it. Just using the law instead of violence this time. Not if we fight back. Rowan grabbed the papers, read through them quickly. We get our own lawyer, we find our documentation, we show up and prove our claim. With what money? Legal representation costs more than we make in 6 months. Then we find a lawyer who will work on contingency, or who believes in the case enough to take payment in other forms. She was pacing now, mind working the problem. And we use Webb's connections. Make this public. Frame it as corruption and land theft. Turn the court case into a scandal. That's a lot of ifs. Everything we've done has been a lot of ifs. She stopped, faced him. But they've worked so far. We're still here. We're still fighting, and I'll be damned if I let some legal technicality finish what violence couldn't. Silas looked at this woman who'd arrived at his dying ranch 2 months ago and transformed everything. The property, the community, and something fundamental in himself that he hadn't known needed transforming. She was right. They'd survived this long by refusing to accept defeat, even when it seemed inevitable. All right, he said. We fight. But we're going to need help. A lot of it. They called another meeting of the collective that evening, laid out the situation. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Jacob offered to help gather documentation. Samuel knew a lawyer in Helena who might be sympathetic. The widow Patterson started organizing a fund for legal expenses. Others volunteered to handle the ranch and forge, while Silas dealt with the court case. This isn't just about your property anymore, Jacob said as the meeting wrapped up. It's about all of us. Crowe wins this, he wins everything. Proves he can take whatever he wants through the courts when violence fails. We can't let that stand. The next month was a blur of preparation. Silas tracked down every document related to his father's claim, every survey record, every piece of paper that proved the Granger family had owned this land legally for 3 decades. Rowan worked the forge dawn to dusk, using every spare moment to finish orders and bank enough money to cover expenses during the trial. And Marcus Webb published his first article about the situation, framing it as frontier corruption and land grabbing by wealthy interests. The response was muted but present. Editorials in other papers, questions asked by reform politicians, enough noise to make territorial officials take notice. When Silas finally left for Helena with Samuel and their contingency lawyer, a young idealist named Thomas Crawford, who'd agreed to take the case for a percentage of success, he felt the weight of the entire collective on his shoulders. Rowan stood in the yard watching them prepare to leave, and something unspoken passed between them. They'd built something together in these months, something more than a business partnership or shared survival, something that looked almost like a life. Don't lose, she said simply. Wasn't planning on it. Good. She stepped forward, and for a moment he thought she might kiss him. Instead, she pressed something into his hand, his father's watch, the one he'd been carrying since this whole nightmare started. For luck, and for remembering what you're fighting for. He closed his fingers around the watch, felt its familiar weight. Then he climbed onto Bess and rode toward Helena, toward a courtroom where the next chapter of this war would be fought with words and documents instead of fists and bullets. Behind him, the forge smoke rose into the winter sky, a signal to anyone watching that they were still here, still working, still refusing to break. The trial would determine the future, but whatever happened, they'd face it the way they'd faced everything else. Together, stubborn, and too damn determined to quit. Helena was bigger than Silas remembered, grown fat on mining money and territorial politics. The The courthouse sat at the center of town like a monument to the idea that justice could be bought with enough marble and brass fixtures. Thomas Crawford was younger than Silas had hoped, maybe 25 with ink-stained fingers, and the kind of nervous energy that came from believing the law actually meant something. He spread their documents across a hotel room table the night before the hearing and tried to look confident. "The original survey is solid," Crawford said, tapping a yellowed map. "Your father's claim was properly filed, boundaries clearly marked. Crow's challenge hinges on a resurvey he commissioned last year that conveniently shows overlap with his property." "So it's his word against ours," Samuel said from where he stood by the window. "Essentially. But we have 3 decades of continuous occupation and improvement. That carries weight in frontier land law." Crawford pulled out another document. "And we have Webb's articles, which establish a pattern of Crow using legal mechanisms to seize property. The judge may not admit them as evidence, but they create context." "What are our actual chances?" Silas asked. Crawford was quiet for a moment. "Honest answer? 40%. Maybe 50 if the judge is having a good day and Crow's lawyer makes a mistake." "So we're probably going to lose." "Probably, but probably isn't certainly, and I've seen worse odds win." Crawford started organizing papers. "The key is making Crow's challenge look like what it is, manufactured justification for theft. If we can do that, if we can get the judge to see the pattern, we have a chance." Silas didn't sleep that night. He lay in the unfamiliar hotel bed and thought about the ranch, about Rowan working the forge alone, about all the people whose futures depended on what happened tomorrow. Thought about his father breaking ground on that land 40 years ago, and his mother buried there, and the weight of legacy that sat heavy on everything they'd built. Around 3 in the morning, he gave up on sleep and went down to the hotel bar. Found Samuel there already, nursing a whiskey and staring at nothing. "Can't stop thinking about Rebecca," Samuel said when Silas sat down. "About how close we came to losing her, how we still might lose everything anyway despite saving her. We did the right thing going after her." "Did we? Cost us Tom Hansen, almost got the rest of us killed, and now we're fighting a court battle we'll probably lose." Samuel drained his glass. "Sometimes I wonder if the right thing and the smart thing are ever the same." "Not often," Silas admitted, "but we sleep better after doing right things, even when they're stupid." "That's a hell of a philosophy." "It's the only one I've got." They sat in silence while the bartender pretended not to listen. Outside, Helena was dark and quiet, sleeping off its prosperity. "What happens if we lose tomorrow?" Samuel asked finally. "We figure out what comes next, same as always." "And if there is no next? If Crow takes the property and destroys the collective and wins everything?" Silas thought about that, about defeat and surrender, and all the ways a man could lose and still keep going. "Then at least we lost trying, at least we made him work for it, and at least we built something worth taking in the first place." Samuel nodded slowly. "Rowan's good for you, you know. You were half dead when she showed up. Now you sound almost human. She saved more than the ranch. You going to tell her that? If I get the chance." The hearing started at 10 the next morning in a courtroom that was too formal for frontier justice. The judge, a gray-haired man named Whitmore, with the tired eyes of someone who'd heard every lie the human mind could manufacture, sat behind a massive oak bench that made him look small and ancient. Crow's lawyer was exactly what Silas expected. Expensive suit, practiced smile, the kind of man who could make theft sound like civic duty. His name was Harrison, and he opened with a presentation about property rights and survey accuracy that was designed to bore everyone into submission. Crawford countered with the original claim documents, walking the judge through 3 decades of legal occupation. His delivery was less polished than Harrison's, but more sincere, and Silas saw Whitmore paying attention in a way that suggested the young lawyer might not be completely outmatched. Then Crow took the stand, and the performance began. He was good. Silas had to give him that. Crow played the concerned businessman discovering survey errors, the responsible landowner trying to clarify legitimate boundaries, the victim of a smear campaign by ungrateful tenants who'd rejected his generous offers. He was calm, reasonable, and utterly convincing if you didn't know what he'd actually done. Crawford cross-examined carefully, trying to establish the pattern of property acquisition, the timing of the survey challenge, the connection to the failed intimidation attempts. Harrison objected constantly, and Whitmore sustained most of them. The rules of evidence were strangling the truth before it could breathe. By lunch recess, Silas felt the case slipping away. They had documents, but Crow had better ones. They had testimony, but his carried more weight. The system was designed for men like him and against people like them. "We need something more," Crawford said over sandwiches they were too nervous to eat. "Something that breaks through the technical arguments and shows what's really happening." "What about Webb's documentation?" Samuel asked. "All those testimonies from people Crow screwed over." "Hearsay. Whitmore won't allow it." Crawford rubbed his face. "We need something direct, something that proves intent." Silas thought about the ledger Rowan had compiled, sitting back at the ranch because Crawford said it wasn't admissible. Thought about all the evidence they'd gathered that the law said didn't count. Thought about how justice and legality weren't always the same thing. "What if we don't play by his rules?" Silas said slowly. Crawford looked up. "What do you mean?" "I mean, the courtroom isn't the only place this fight is happening. Webb's articles are stirring up attention. People are watching. What if we use that?" "I don't follow." "You're thinking like a lawyer trying to win on technical merits. But this isn't really about surveys or boundaries. It's about power and who gets to wield it." Silas leaned forward. "What if instead of convincing the judge, we convince everyone else? Make it so expensive for Crow to win that victory costs more than it's worth?" Crawford started to object, then stopped. "You're talking about public pressure, about making this trial into a referendum on territorial corruption. I'm talking about fighting the war we can win instead of the one he chose." Silas stood. "Can you stall? Give us time to make noise?" "Maybe. If I stretch out cross-examination, call more witnesses, I can probably buy a day or two." Crawford's expression shifted from defeated to calculating. "What are you planning?" "I'm planning to remind people that the law is supposed to serve justice, not the other way around." Silas spent the lunch recess visiting every newspaper office in Helena, telling anyone who'd listen about the case. Some dismissed him. Others were already following the story because of Webb's coverage. One, a local reporter named Sarah Chen, who'd been covering territorial corruption for years, listened with sharp interest. "You're saying Barrett Crow is using the courts to legitimize land theft?" Chen asked, taking notes. "I'm saying look at the pattern. Look at how many properties he's acquired through sudden legal challenges, foreclosures that happen right after people refuse his offers, surveys that conveniently discover errors after decades." Silas pulled out copies of documents Crawford had deemed inadmissible. "This is systematic. This is what power looks like when it decides law is just another tool. These could be coincidences. They could be, but you're a reporter. You know the difference between coincidence and conspiracy when you see it." He met her eyes. "And you know what it means if someone like Crow can weaponize the legal system against anyone who challenges him." Chen studied him for a long moment. "I'll look into it, but I need more than documents. I need people willing to go on record. Can you provide that?" "I can provide a whole community of people he's crushed or tried to crush. Question is whether you're willing to print it. If it's true, I'll print it. But if you're wasting my time or feeding me lies, I'll print that too." Fair enough. The afternoon session went badly. Harrison tore apart their survey documentation, found tiny inconsistencies that Crawford couldn't adequately explain, made it sound like the Granger claim was built on incompetence and wishful thinking. Whitmore looked increasingly skeptical, and by the time court adjourned for the day, Silas could read defeat in Crawford's slumped shoulders. "We're losing," the young lawyer said as they walked back to the hotel. "Badly. Unless something changes, Whitmore rules against us tomorrow afternoon." "Then we make sure something changes," Silas said. That night, Chen's article hit the evening edition of Helena's main newspaper. It wasn't the front page, but it was prominent. "Pattern of property seizures raises questions about territorial land baron." The piece laid out Crow's history of acquisitions, questioned the timing of legal challenges, and framed the current case as part of a larger pattern of corruption. By morning, 2 other papers had picked up the story. By the time court reconvened, there was a crowd outside. Reporters, concerned citizens, people who'd read about the case and wanted to see justice done, or at least witness if it wasn't. Whitmore noticed. Silas saw him clock the crowd, saw something shift in his expression. Judges were appointed by territorial governors who answered to voters, and public attention meant political pressure. It didn't guarantee anything, but it changed the math. Crawford, sensing the shift, went on offense. He called witness after witness, people from the collective who testified about Crow's intimidation, threats. the attempted arson. Harrison objected constantly, and Whitmore sustained most of them. But the testimony got heard by the packed courtroom even when it wasn't officially admitted as evidence. Then Crawford did something brilliant. He called Silas to the stand and asked him to describe what the land meant to his family. Not the legal technicalities or survey details, but the human story. The 40 years of work, the graves in the family plot, the forge his grandfather built and his partner had revived. Harrison objected on relevance. Whitmore overruled him, and Silas saw surprise flash across the lawyer's face. The judge was paying attention now in a different way. "Mr. Granger," Crawford asked, "why haven't you just sold the property and moved on? Saved yourself this fight." "Because some things aren't for sale," Silas said. "Because my father broke his back building something he could pass down, and my mother's buried there. And because in the last few months we've built a community that matters. Selling would mean all that work, all those sacrifices, all those people. It would mean they counted for nothing, and I can't accept that." "Even if it costs you everything?" "Especially then, because what's the point of having something if you won't defend it?" Harrison's cross-examination tried to paint Silas as an unrealistic idealist clinging to a failing enterprise. But the crowd in the courtroom wasn't buying it, and neither, increasingly, was Whitmore. The judge kept glancing at the packed gallery, at the reporters taking notes, at the public watching to see if territorial law served justice or just protected power. Crow took the stand again for rebuttal testimony, and this time he looked less composed. The crowd's presence was affecting him too, making him defensive in ways that undermined his earlier calm authority. Crawford pushed hard on the timing of the survey challenge, on Crow's other property acquisitions, on his response to the collective's formation. "Isn't it true," Crawford asked, "that you filed this legal challenge only after Mr. Granger's forge operation began successfully competing with your own?" "The timing is coincidental," Crow said, but there was tension in his voice now. "Coincidental. Like it was coincidental that the Patterson property came up for foreclosure days after Widow Patterson refused to sell to you? Like it was coincidental that the Hanson brothers faced sudden legal complications after they joined the collective?" "Objection." Harrison was on his feet. "Counsel is introducing prejudicial material unrelated to this case." "It establishes pattern and intent, Your Honor," Crawford countered. Whitmore thought for a long moment while the courtroom held its breath. Then he said, "I'll allow it. Answer the question, Mr. Crow." Something shifted in that moment. The judge had just signaled whose side the law was going to serve today, and everyone felt it. Crow tried to recover, tried to explain away the patterns, but his smooth confidence was cracking. When Crawford finally finished cross-examination, the cattle baron looked like what he was, a powerful man unused to being challenged, furious that the system he'd manipulated for years was suddenly remembering it was supposed to be about justice. Closing arguments were almost anticlimactic. Harrison made a technical case about survey accuracy. Crawford made a moral case about frontier families and the purpose of law. And Whitmore listened to both with an expression that gave nothing away. "I'll have a ruling by morning," the judge said finally. "Court is adjourned." The wait was agony. Silas spent the night unable to eat or sleep or think about anything except Rowan back at the ranch, working without knowing if any of it would matter. He wanted to be there with her, wanted to tell her everything they'd done here, wanted to know if she was safe. Around midnight, Samuel knocked on his hotel room door. "Can't sleep either?" "Not even close." "Been thinking about what you said on the stand, about some things not being for sale." Samuel sat in the room's single chair. "I spent years trying to build security for my family. Thought if I just worked hard enough, played by the rules, we'd be safe. Then Crow took my daughter to force my compliance, and I realized security isn't something you buy or earn. It's something you create by standing with people who'll stand with you." "We've built that," Silas said. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we built something real." "Yeah, we did." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "You think it'll be enough?" "Has to be, because I don't know what else we've got." The morning came cold and clear. The courtroom was packed again, more people than before, drawn by the news coverage and the sense that something significant was happening. Whitmore took his seat looking like he hadn't slept either, and when he began reading his decision, his voice was formal but firm. "This court has reviewed all evidence and testimony regarding the property dispute between Barrett Crow and Silas Granger. The question before us is whether Mr. Crow's survey constitutes legitimate grounds for challenging the boundaries of the Granger property claim. Silas felt his hands clenching, forced them to relax. Beside him, Crawford sat perfectly still. The court finds, Whitmore continued, that while Mr. Crow's survey shows technical discrepancies with the original claim, these discrepancies are minor and appear to have been within acceptable margins of error for the time period in question. Furthermore, the court notes that Mr. Granger's family has occupied and improved the property continuously for 30 years without challenge, which establishes clear precedent under frontier land law. Silas's heart was pounding so hard he almost missed the next words. Additionally, this court is troubled by the timing of Mr. Crow's challenge and the pattern of similar challenges that have been brought to our attention. While not directly relevant to the technical question of survey accuracy, they raise concerns about the motivation behind this filing. The law is meant to resolve legitimate disputes, not serve as a weapon for commercial competition. Someone in the gallery gasped. Silas saw Crow's face darkening, his lawyer whispering urgently. "Therefore," Whitmore said, his voice cutting through the growing murmur, "this court rules in favor of Silas Granger. The original property claim stands as valid. Mr. Crow's challenge is dismissed with prejudice, meaning it cannot be refiled. Mr. Granger retains full ownership of the disputed property." The courtroom erupted. People were cheering, reporters scribbling frantically, and Samuel was clapping Silas on the back hard enough to hurt. Crawford looked shocked, like he couldn't quite believe they'd actually won. Silas just sat there trying to process it. They'd won. Against all odds, against power and money and a rigged system, they'd actually won. Crow stormed out of the courtroom with his lawyer, his face a mask of barely contained rage. Silas watched him go and felt something strange, not triumph exactly, but a kind of weary satisfaction. They'd beaten him not by being stronger or richer, but by refusing to quit and by making enough noise that the system had to pay attention. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had grown even larger. Chen was there with her notebook, and other reporters were calling questions. And suddenly, everyone wanted to know about the Forge and the Collective and how a dying ranch had become the center of a fight against territorial corruption. Silas answered what he could, but mostly he just wanted to go home. Wanted to see Rowan and tell her they'd won. That the ranch was safe, the Forge could continue, the community could keep building without Crow's shadow hanging over everything. The ride back took 3 days, and every mile felt both too long and too short. Samuel talked about rebuilding, about what they'd do now that the threat had passed. Crawford, who'd decided to ride with them, talked about other cases he could take, other communities facing similar corruption, the larger fight that this victory represented. Silas mostly stayed quiet, turning over everything that had happened. They'd won the legal battle, but it had cost them. Tom Hansen's probable death, injuries and trauma, months of fear and exhaustion. Victory didn't erase that cost. It just made it mean something. When they finally crested the last hill and saw the ranch below, Silas's breath caught. Smoke rose from the forge chimney in a steady column. Cattle grazed in repaired pastures. The house looked lived in, maintained, alive. And standing in the yard, hammer in hand like she was ready to fight whatever came next, was Rowan. She saw them coming and dropped the hammer. Started walking, then running, and Silas urged Bess into a trot to meet her halfway. He dismounted before the horse fully stopped and caught Rowan as she slammed into him, arms wrapping around him with a fierceness that drove the air from his lungs. "You won," she said against his chest. "Webb sent word yesterday. You actually won." "We won," he corrected. "All of us." She pulled back enough to look at his face, and he saw tears on her cheeks that she wasn't bothering to hide. "I didn't think. I hoped, but I didn't think." "Neither did I." He touched her face, wiped away tears with his thumb. "But we did it. The ranch is ours. The forge is ours. Everything we built gets to stay." "Everything we built," she repeated, and the way she said it made it clear she meant more than property and business. They stood there in the yard while Samuel rode past with a wave, and Crawford politely looked elsewhere. And Silas realized this was the moment. The one where you either said the thing that needed saying or spent the rest of your life wondering what if. "I love you," he said, and the words came out easier than he'd expected. "I don't know when it happened or how, but somewhere between foreclosure and freedom, I fell completely in love with you." Rowan's breath hitched. "You're sure?" Because I'm difficult and stubborn, and I come with more baggage than any man should have to deal with. I'm sure. Because you're difficult and stubborn, and you rebuilt my life when I'd given up on it. He smiled. And because I don't want to face another Montana winter without you. That's the most unromantic declaration I've ever heard. I know. Still mean it, though. She laughed, and it was the first time he'd heard her laugh without any darkness in it. I love you too. Have for weeks, probably. Was just too scared to say it because every time I've cared about something, it got taken away. Not this time. Not this time, she agreed, and then she kissed him right there in the muddy yard with half the collective watching from various locations and nobody caring about propriety or appearances or anything except the fact that they were alive and together and the future looked like something worth building. The next few months transformed everything. Word of their victory spread across the territory, and suddenly the collective became a model other communities wanted to replicate. The forge expanded, requiring Silas to hire 2 apprentices to help with the overwhelming demand. The ranch stabilized, the cattle herd grew, and the land that had been dying when Rowan arrived was thriving now, with work and care and the kind of attention it had always deserved. Crow disappeared from the region entirely. Rumors said he'd moved his operations north, that the court case had damaged his reputation enough to make his Montana holdings untenable. Other rumors said he'd declared bankruptcy and left the territory in disgrace. Whatever the truth, he was gone, and the vacuum he left let smaller operations flourish. Marcus Webb published a series of articles about the case that sparked reform movements across the frontier territories. Sarah Chen won an award for her coverage. Thomas Crawford built a practice defending homesteaders against land fraud, using the Granger case as precedent. And on a spring morning 6 months after the trial, when the last snow had melted and the prairie was turning green, Silas and Rowan stood in front of the forge with everyone who mattered, the collective, neighbors from 100 miles around, Samuel and Rebecca, Jacob with his wife, the widow Patterson, and the Hanson brothers, and all the others who'd stood with them when standing was dangerous. They got married there, in front of the forge that had saved them both, with no fancy ceremony or religious trappings. Just a simple exchange of promises witnessed by people who understood what those promises meant, that they'd keep building together, that they'd keep fighting for what mattered, that they'd face whatever came next as partners in every sense of the word. The celebration lasted until dawn, but eventually people drifted home, and it was just the 2 of them standing in the yard as the sun came up. "Think we'll be happy?" Rowan asked, leaning against him. "I think we'll be busy," Silas said. "Happy's something you choose every day, not something you achieve once and keep." That's surprisingly philosophical for a rancher. I learned it from a blacksmith who showed up at my dying ranch and reminded me that nothing's over until you quit. He turned to face her. "And I don't plan on quitting anytime soon." "Good," she smiled, "because I've got ideas for expanding the operation, and they're going to require a lot of work." "Of course you do." "We could add a second forge, maybe train more apprentices. Build this into something that serves the whole territory, not just local customers. We could also just enjoy what we've built, maybe take a day off once in a while." "Where's the fun in that?" They argued about it good-naturedly as they walked back to the house, already planning and debating and building the future in their heads the way they'd built everything else. Together. Argumentative and absolutely certain they'd figure it out. Because that's what survival looked like on the frontier. Not perfect victories or fairy tale endings, but stubborn people refusing to quit, finding each other in the wreckage, and building something that mattered from whatever materials were left. It wasn't pretty, or easy, or anything like the stories made it sound. But it was real. And real, Silas had learned, was worth more than perfect ever could be. Years later, when people asked how they'd survived when so many others had failed, Rowan always gave the same answer. "We got lucky. And when luck ran out, we got stubborn. And when stubborn wasn't enough, we got help from people who believed the same things we did. That community matters more than power. That justice is worth fighting for, even when the system's rigged. And that sometimes the only way to save yourself is to save everyone around you first." Silas would usually add, "And we had a really good blacksmith." And Rowan would punch him in the arm, and they'd argue about whose contribution mattered more. And everyone watching would understand that this was love in its truest form. Not romance or sentiment, but partnership forged in the fire of shared struggle and tempered by the knowledge that anything worth keeping is worth defending. The ranch prospered. The forge became legendary. The collective grew into a network that changed how frontier communities organized themselves. And the story of how one dying ranch and one desperate partnership became the foundation for something larger spread across the territories, inspiring others to stand together when standing alone seemed impossible. But for Silas and Rowan, the real victory was simpler and more personal. It was watching seasons change on land they'd fought to keep. It was the sound of hammers in the forge and cattle in the pastures. It was sitting on the porch in the evenings, tired from work that mattered, planning tomorrow while remembering how close they'd come to losing every tomorrow they'd have. It was building a life together, one stubborn day at a time, and discovering that sometimes the things we fight hardest for are the things we needed most all along. Not just the land or the business or the victory, but the person standing beside us through all of it, equally scarred and equally determined to make something good out of the brutal lottery of survival. The brutal lottery of that was their legacy. Not perfection, but perseverance. Not fairy tales, but truth. Not the end of hardship, but the beginning of a life worth the struggle it took to build. And on the Montana frontier, in a world that took more than it gave and broke more people than it made, that was as close to victory as anyone could hope to find.